Abigail Carter drove the fence post into the ground with both fists the morning Harold Briggs told her she had 30 days to disappear. Not a mallet. Her fists. Because the mallet was in the barn, and she was not going to stop, not for one single breath, and let that man watch her walk away to fetch a tool. She had her father's land, her father's water, and exactly no one left to fight for either. Then a mountain cowboy rode down from the high pass, broke dusty and carrying a secret that would change everything. She thought she was fighting alone. If this story already has your heart, subscribe, and stay until the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Abigail's story travels. The summer of 1884 arrived in the Colorado high country. The way bad news always did, quietly without warning and far too early in the morning. Abigail Carter had been awake since before first light. She always was. Sleep had not come easily since the fever took her father in March, and it came even less easily now that she understood the full weight of what he had left behind. Not just the land, not just the cattle and the broken equipment and the debts. She was still discovering tucked into the backs of drawers and folded inside coat pockets. He had left her a fight. And Abigail, who had grown up watching her father lose that fight, inch by inch, year by year, had decided on the morning of his funeral that she was not going to lose it the same way. She was on her knees beside the paddock gate when she heard the horses coming up the road. Not one horse, several. That alone told her enough. She did not stand. She finished what she was doing, driving the iron pin back into the hinge with the heel of her palm, ignoring the way the rust bit into her skin, and only then did she rise to her feet, brush the dirt from her dress, and turn to face whatever was coming. There were 4 of them. Harold Briggs rode in front the way he always did, because Harold Briggs had never in his life chosen to stand behind another man if he could arrange otherwise. He was 53 years old, thick through the shoulders, and he wore his prosperity the way some men wore a weapon, visibly deliberately, so that you understood what you were dealing with before a single word was spoken. Behind him came his son Fletcher, who had his father's jaw and none of his father's patience. And behind Fletcher rode 2 men Abigail recognized from the bank and ridgeline, not as individuals, but as a type. Men who carried papers. Men who showed up when a thing was already decided and needed only to be formalized. "Miss Carter," Harold said, pulling his horse to a stop at the gate she had just repaired. He looked at her hands, at the rust stain across her palm. Something moved across his face that might have been pity, or might have been satisfaction. With Harold Briggs, it was sometimes difficult to know the difference. "I think you know why we're here." "I know why you think you're here," Abigail said. Fletcher made a sound, not quite a laugh. "It's the 15th, Miss Carter. I can read a calendar, Mr. Briggs." Harold dismounted. He was the kind of man who always dismounted when he wanted you to understand that a conversation was serious, that he was not going to deliver news from horseback like a messenger, but was going to stand on the same earth as you and look you in the eye while he took something from you. She had seen him do it to her father twice. She had promised herself she would not let him do it to her. "Your father's final payment was due at the end of May," Harold said, reaching into his coat. "We extended courtesy to you through the spring given the circumstances. That courtesy expires today." One of the men from the bank produced a document. He held it out toward her. She did not take it. "I'm aware of the terms," she said. "I am also aware that the deed to this land was filed with the territorial office in Denver in 1871 under my father's name, and that there is a provision in that filing that requires 30 days written notice before any forced sale can be initiated." She looked at the document the bankman was still holding out. "Is that 30 days notice?" Harold's expression changed. Just slightly. Just enough. "It is a preliminary notice," he said carefully. "Then I have 30 days. Miss Carter." 30 days, Mr. Briggs." She turned back to the gate. "I'll expect the formal filing to come through the proper channels. Good morning." She heard the silence that followed. She heard Fletcher mutter something to his father. She heard Harold breathe in and breathe out the long measured breath of a man recalibrating. "You can't run this place alone," Harold said finally. "Your father couldn't run it with 2 hired hands and 20 years of experience. You are 27 years old, and you have a mule, 8 cattle, and a roof that didn't survive the last hard rain intact. What exactly is your plan, if you don't mind my asking?" Abigail did not turn around. "My plan," she said, "is none of your concern." She listened to them leave. She counted the hoofbeats until they faded back down the mountain road, and then she stood very still with her hands on the gate she had just fixed, and she let herself feel for exactly 30 seconds. Everything she was not going to let Harold Briggs see on her face. The fear. The exhaustion. The particular kind of grief that comes not from losing a person, but from watching everything that person built dissolve around you like salt in rain. 30 seconds. She had given herself that rule the week her father died, and she kept it. Then she went back to work. The well pump was the first problem of the morning. The second was the south fence, where 3 posts had worked themselves loose over the winter, and were now leaning at angles that would not hold cattle through the afternoon, let alone through the summer grazing season. The third problem was the roof above the storage room, which she had patched with pine tar and canvas in April, and which had begun in the warmth of June to separate at the seam. She addressed them in order of urgency. The fence first, because cattle were immediate. The pump second, because water was survival. The roof third, because the flour and salt and dried beans in that storage room represented most of what stood between her and a very hard autumn. By mid-morning, her back ached from digging post holes in the Rocky Mountain soil. By noon, she had finished 3 of the 5 posts and had come back to the house for water and to check on the bread she had left rising before the men from the bank arrived. By early afternoon, she was back at the fence line, and that was where she was crouched in the dirt. Her hands wrapped around a fence post that outweighed her stubbornness by about 40 pounds, when she heard hoofbeats on the mountain road again. She thought for one sharp, angry moment that Harold Briggs had come back. But it was only one horse, and it was coming from the north, from the high pass, from the mountains themselves, from the direction that most sensible people did not come from in the summer, because the high pass was long and exposed, and the mountain weather in June could turn without warning. Abigail straightened and turned, and watched the horse come down off the trail and onto the road in front of her property. The man on it was large. That was the first thing she noticed, the sheer size of him, broad through the shoulders, in the way of men who had done physical labor all their lives, not the cultivated bulk of men who exercised for show. His coat was old and trail-worn, the color of it faded to something between brown and gray. His hat was pulled down against the afternoon glare. He rode easily the way men rode who had spent more time on horseback than off it, as if the horse beneath him was simply an extension of his own weight and intention. He slowed when he reached her gate. He looked at the broken fence post still lying on the ground beside her. He looked at the 3 she had set. He looked at her hands. Then he looked at her face. "You got 2 more posts need setting," he said. It was not a question. "I'm aware of that," she said. "And a roof seam going on that outbuilding." "I'm aware of that too." Howe was quiet for a moment. Under the brim of his hat, his eyes were the pale gray-green of mountain water, the kind of eyes that had spent years reading weather and terrain, and the intentions of people who were not always straightforward about what they wanted. "I'm looking for work," he said. "Ranch work, day labor or longer, whatever you've got." Abigail looked at him the way her father had taught her to look at a horse you were considering, not at the pretty parts, but at the feet, the joints, the chest, the way it held its weight. She looked at the man's hands where they rested on the saddle horn, calloused past the point of pain. The knuckles scarred in the way that came from years of cold weather and rough work, not from fighting. She looked at the way he sat still patient, without the restless energy of a man who was hiding something immediate. "I don't have much to pay," she said. "I didn't ask what you had to pay." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." He looked out at the fence line. At the posts she had managed alone, which were not quite straight, but were solid. "Room and board against wages if that works for you. We can settle the number after I've seen what needs doing." "I'd need to know your name." "Caleb," he said. "Caleb Montgomery." "Where are you coming from, Mr. Montgomery?" A pause. Small, but there. "North," he said. "Up through the divide." Abigail had grown up in these mountains. She knew what coming through the divide in early June meant, what it cost in terms of time and exposure, and the particular kind of determination required to take the high route when the lower roads were easier. "Why?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "The lower roads were busy," he said. It was not a complete answer. She filed that away. "I have one rule," she said. "You work, you're honest, and you don't make decisions about this property that aren't yours to make. This is my land, my operation. You take direction from me, not the other way around." Something shifted in his expression. It might have been amusement. It might have been respect. With a man like this, she suspected the two were not always different things. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Then put your horse in the paddock and get started on those posts. There's food at sundown." She watched him work. Not constantly, she had her own work to do, and standing around watching a hired hand was not a habit she intended to develop. But she watched in the way that any sensible woman alone on a remote mountain property watched an unknown man she had just given access to her land and her outbuildings. How was efficient? She noticed that first. He did not waste motion. He did not stand back and assess when assessment was not needed. He simply moved from one task to the next with the quiet purposefulness of someone who understood exactly what needed doing and had enough experience to do it without instruction. The fence posts went in straight. She could tell from the far end of the paddock that they were straight and that they would hold. He found the rot in the fourth post hole without being told it was there. She saw him stop, crouch, run his fingers along the soil, and then go back to the barn and come back with limestone from the bag she kept for the garden. He packed it around the base before setting the post. Her father had done the same thing. It was not common knowledge. It was the kind of thing you learned from long experience or from someone who had it. She thought about that while she worked on the pump. At sundown, she put food on the table, salt pork and beans, and the bread from that morning which had come out well despite everything, and called him in from the yard. He washed at the pump first, which she noted. He took his hat off before he stepped through the door, which she also noted. He sat where she pointed, and he did not talk while she put the food on the table, and when she sat across from him, he looked at her and waited. "Eat," she said. "Thank you, ma'am." They ate in silence for a while. The mountain evening settled around the house, the temperature dropping the way it always did in June at this elevation fast, like a decision. "The limestone," she said finally, "in the post hole." He looked up. "My father used to do that," she said. "Stops the rot. Most hired hands I've had didn't know to do it." He said nothing, just held her gaze with those gray-green eyes. "Where did you learn it?" she said. "Old-timer up in the Sawatch Range," he said. "Ran cattle up there for 30 years. Said it was the difference between a fence that lasts a season and one that lasts a decade." He was right. Another silence. This one was different from the first, more settled, less provisional. "The Sawatch Range is a long way north," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "How long have you been coming south?" He set down his fork, not impatiently, deliberately. "Miss Carter," he said, "I notice you're a direct woman, so I'll be direct back at you. I'm looking for work and a quiet place to do it. I'm not running from the law. I'm not trouble. I can't give you a full accounting of the last several years because it would take longer than dinner, and it's not entirely pleasant, and I don't see that it changes whether I can set a fence post or not." He picked his fork back up. "If that's not enough, I can be gone by morning." Abigail studied him across the table. "What happened?" she said. "In the north." His jaw tightened, just fractionally. "I made a mistake," he said. "The kind that cost people something. I couldn't fix it, so I left." "And running away from it helped?" "No," he said. "It did not." She picked up her coffee cup. "You can stay," she said. "But I want the truth about that mistake before the summer's out." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a fair condition," he said. "Good." She stood and began clearing the plates. "The bunkhouse is through the back of the barn. There's a stove in there that doesn't draw well on the right side. Bank the fire on the left." Ridgeline was a town that had opinions about everything and time enough to share them all. Abigail had known this her entire life. She had grown up on the receiving end of Ridgeline's opinions about her father's stubbornness, about her mother's early death, about the Carter Ranch, and its persistent refusal to either thrive properly or fail decisively, which seemed to irritate the town more than either outcome would have. Ridgeline liked resolution. It liked things to be settled. A woman alone on a mountain ranch in genuine difficulty was one kind of story. A woman alone on a mountain ranch who refused to be in difficulty in the way the town expected was an entirely different kind, and it made people uncomfortable. She found this out at market on Thursday. She had ridden into town to sell 24 eggs and buy lamp oil, the same errand she made every 2 weeks. She had done it alone for 3 months since her father died. She was doing it now with a name to put to the hired hand she had taken on, and somehow through what mechanism she could not entirely identify, since she had not told anyone the whole of Ridgeline already knew it. Dorothy Marsh caught her at the lamp oil counter. "I hear you've taken on a man," Dorothy said in the tone of someone delivering news they expect to be scandalous. "I've taken on a ranch hand," Abigail said. "There's work to be done." "A stranger," Dorothy said. "No one knows him." "I know him well enough." "Abigail." Dorothy leaned in, lowering her voice in the way that meant she wanted to be overheard. "A woman alone, and a strange man riding in out of nowhere. I have 8 cattle that need tending, a fence line that needed 5 posts reset, and a storage roof that won't see out the summer without repair," Abigail said. "Unless you're volunteering to come up and help me with any of that, Dorothy, I don't see how the man doing it is your concern." Dorothy drew back. 2 women at the next counter turned to look. Abigail paid for her lamp oil. On her way out, she passed Fletcher Briggs coming through the door. He stopped. He looked at her with the particular expression he had worn since they were children, the look of a man who had always assumed she would eventually need something from him, and was perpetually surprised when she didn't. "Heard you hired yourself a drifter," he said. "I hired a ranch hand." "Same thing." "Not to anyone with a working understanding of vocabulary." Fletcher's jaw tightened. "My father's not going to stop, you know. 30 days or 30 years he wants that land. Then he's going to have a long wait," she said, and walked past him into the street. Caleb had the roof seam repaired by the following Monday. He used pine pitch and new canvas. She had wondered if she had enough canvas in the barn, and she had almost, which turned out to be a recurring theme with Caleb Montgomery and her supplies. He worked with what was there. He did not ask for more. He looked at what was available, calculated, and made it sufficient. She found herself watching the calculation. Watching the way he moved through the barn in the morning with the quiet authority of a man who understood animals not performing calm, but genuinely indifferent to the places where noise and haste lived. Her cattle had been edgy all spring, and within a week of his arrival, they were moving differently, standing quieter, eating better. "You have a way with them," she said one evening, watching him move the small herd to the night pasture. "They know whether you're frightened," he said. "If you're not, they settle. You're not frightened of much." He was quiet for a moment. The cattle moved past them, their heavy breath warm in the cooling air. "I'm frightened of plenty," he said. "I've just had a lot of practice not showing it." She looked at his profile. The line of his jaw, the way he watched the cattle with the same still attention he brought to everything. "What was the mistake?" she said. "In the north." He didn't answer immediately. He waited until the last cow had passed through the gate, and then he latched it, and he stood with his hand on the latch for a moment before he turned. "I led an expedition," he said. "Surveying party. 8 men, myself included. I knew the route, I'd run it twice before. But there was a storm system moving in from the northwest and I read it wrong." He stopped, started again. "I read it wrong, or I read it right, and I convinced myself I was wrong because we were behind schedule, and the man paying for it was not a patient man." He looked at her directly then. 2 men got hurt. One of them lost 3 fingers to frostbite. The other one was laid up for 6 months with injuries from a rockfall. We wouldn't have been anywhere near if I'd turned us back when I should have. The evening was very quiet. Wind moved through the grass. Somewhere up the mountain, a hawk called once. "Did they live?" Abigail said. "They did." "Did they blame you?" "They did not," he said. "That was almost worse." She understood that. She understood what it was to be forgiven for something before you had finished punishing yourself for it. "Why did you leave?" she said. "If they didn't hold it against you." "Because I did," he said simply. "And I couldn't look at them anymore without seeing what I'd cost them." He paused. "And because the man paying for the expedition told everyone it was the weather. Not my call, not my mistake. The weather." His voice was even, carefully even. "He did it to protect his own investment, his reputation for hiring competent guides. I let him do it. I took the money. I left." He looked away from her. "That's the part I can't forgive myself for." Abigail stood still. "The money," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You were paid for something you considered a failure, and you kept the payment and walked away." "Yes." She thought about that. About the specific texture of that kind of self-knowledge, not the dramatic wrongdoing, but the quiet, terrible one. The choice made under pressure that you can't unchoose. "You came through the high pass," she said slowly. "In June, when the lower roads were easier and faster." He said nothing. "That's not a road for a man in a hurry," she said. "That's a road for a man punishing himself." The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, something else. "Maybe," he said finally. "Or maybe a man who needed to remember that he could still read the mountain right." She looked at him for a long moment. "And could you," she said, "read it right?" "I'm here," he said. She nodded once slowly. "Come in for supper," she said. "There's something I need to tell you about what Harold Briggs said to me this morning." Harold had come back, not in person. He was too careful for that, too aware of the 30-day notice and what it meant. He had sent a letter delivered by the bank clerk outlining the terms of what he called a fair and reasonable purchase offer for the Carter property. The letter was 3 pages long. It was very politely worded. It was underneath the courtesy, a declaration of inevitability, the kind of letter that assumed its own conclusion, and simply asked Abigail to agree to the timing. She put it on the table between them. Caleb read it without speaking. He read it the way she had learned he read everything completely, not moving until he had finished. Then still for a moment before he looked up. "He wants the water," Caleb said. Abigail blinked. "The land," she said. "The land because of the water," he said. He put his finger on a paragraph near the bottom. "He mentions the creek 3 times, the seasonal spring twice, and he specifically includes the water rights in the purchase terms, which means he already knows. There's an argument to be made that they're separate from the land title, and he wants to close it before you find out." Abigail stared at the page. She had read it 3 times. She had not seen that. "The Larimer County water rights filing," she said slowly. "My father, he filed those separately, in 69 before the land deed." "Were they included in the deed when he filed it?" "I don't know. I'd have to look at the original documents." Caleb was quiet. He looked at the letter again. "If the water rights are separate," he said, "and they're in your father's name, and they pass to you as estate, Briggs can buy the land out from under you, and you still hold the water, which means the land is worth considerably less to him than he's offering. Which means he knows something you don't, or he's hoping you don't know something he does." Abigail sat back in her chair. She thought about Harold Briggs on the morning of her father's funeral arriving at the church with a casserole, and a comment about how the mountain was hard country for a woman alone. She thought about his careful sympathy and his measured condolences and the bank letter that had arrived 11 days later. "He's been planning this since before my father died," she said. It was not a question. Caleb said nothing. "I need to get to Denver," she said. "To the Territorial Records Office. I need to see my father's original water filing." "That's a 2-day ride." "I know it. I can manage the property while you go." She looked at him, measured him the way she had measured him on the first day, not at the pretty parts, but at what held. "I know you can," she said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it without reservation, without the small internal negotiation that usually accompanied trust in someone she had known for less than 2 weeks. Caleb Montgomery had been on her property for 11 days. He had fixed her fence and her roof and her pump and the hinge on the barn door she hadn't even mentioned. He had told her the truth about the worst thing he had ever done. He had looked at a 3-page letter designed to confuse and immediately found what it was actually about. She did not know what he had been in the mountains before he came here, but she was beginning to understand what he was now. "I'll leave in the morning," she said. "I'll have your horse ready at first light," he said. She stood, gathered the letter, folded it back into its envelope. "Caleb," she said. He looked up. "Whatever you did in the north," she said. "Whatever you left behind, you read the mountain right this time." She did not wait for him to answer. She went to put the letter in the box with her father's papers, and the evening settled around the house, and somewhere in the bunkhouse. Through the back of the barn, a man who had spent 2 years trying to outrun himself sat in the quiet and began in the slowest and most cautious way possible to consider the idea of standing still. Abigail left before the sun cleared the peaks. She had packed light her father's original land documents in the saddlebag, 2 days of food, the letter from Harold Briggs folded against her chest, where she could feel it. Caleb had the horse saddled and waiting at the paddock gate exactly as he said he would, and when she rode out, he was already moving toward the south fence, with a post driver over his shoulder, not watching her go, which she appreciated more than she would have appreciated a send-off. She rode hard and she thought harder. The water rights. She turned the idea over the entire first day of riding the way you turn a stone to find what lives under it. Her father had been a careful man about some things, and careless about others. He had kept meticulous records of his cattle numbers and approximate records of his finances, which was part of why the debts had surprised her, not their existence, but their size. He had filed his original homestead claim in 1869, and she had that document. She had seen it every year of her life, framed above the fireplace in what her father called the good room, the room he never actually used. But the water filing. She was trying to remember when he had mentioned it. If he had mentioned it. If she had been old enough to understand what it meant when he did. She reached Ridgeline by mid-afternoon of the first day, stopped only long enough to water the horse and buy bread at the bakery. She went to the side door, not wanting to navigate the questions that would come with walking through the front, and was back on the road south within the hour. She did not see Fletcher Briggs watching her from the window of the land office, but he saw her. Back at the Carter Ranch, Caleb worked. He worked the way he always worked when his mind was occupied with something he could not resolve by thinking about it directly, which was to say, he put his body at the problem and let his thoughts run underneath. The south fence first, because she had mentioned it again before she left, mentioned it in the tone of something that genuinely worried her. He found the soft spots in the line that she hadn't reached yet. Set 2 more posts. Checked the tension on the wire and found 3 places where it had been repaired with mismatched gauge, which meant it would hold until it didn't, which in mountain country meant it would hold right up until the moment you needed it most. He replaced the mismatched sections. He had wire in the barn, not much but enough. In the afternoon, he moved the cattle to the north pasture because the grass there was coming in better, and the herd was leaner than it should be for this point in summer. He counted them while they moved. 8 head, as she'd said. But one of the younger cows was favoring her left front leg in a way that hadn't been noticeable when the whole herd was standing still. He caught her at the gate, ran his hand down her leg, found the heat in the fetlock. Not serious yet. Serious enough to watch. He treated it with what he found in the barn. There was a tin of drawing salve on the 3rd shelf, older but still good, and made a note to tell Abigail when she returned. He was thinking about how to tell her when he heard the horse in the yard. He came out of the barn slowly, the way you came out of a barn when you didn't know what was waiting. Fletcher Briggs was sitting on his horse in the middle of Abigail's yard, looking around with the proprietary ease of a man who had already decided a thing was his. He was alone. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Fletcher Briggs, the last time he'd seen him passing them both on the road into town 4 days ago, had the comfortable arrogance of a man who didn't go places alone because he didn't have to. Coming alone meant this visit was personal, or it meant to be deniable. Neither option was good. "She's not here," Caleb said. Fletcher looked at him, took his time about it. "I know she's not here," he said. "I saw her ride south this morning." Then you know this isn't a good time to call. I didn't come to call on her. Fletcher swung down off his horse with the careful ease of a man performing casualness. I came to talk to you. Caleb said nothing. He stood in the barn doorway with his arms loose at his sides and waited. My father tells me she's got 30 days, Fletcher said. Give or take. And I think you're a smart enough man to know what 30 days means for your employment situation out here. He looked around the yard again. She's going to lose this property. She knows it. You probably know it. The only person who doesn't seem to know it is her, which, he smiled, and it didn't reach anything above his mouth, is admirable, I suppose, in its way. What do you want, Mr. Briggs? I want to offer you a different kind of employment, Fletcher said. My father's operation is 3 times the size of this one. Better equipment, better pay, guaranteed through the winter. He paused. All I'd need in return is information. Caleb looked at him. What kind? Whatever she's doing, Fletcher said. Where she's going. What she found in her father's papers. My father has reason to believe there may be documentation relating to some of the property's older filings that could complicate things for everyone. He said the last 2 words with a particular deliberateness. It would be better for all parties if those complications were understood before anyone went to the trouble of a trip to Denver. The yard was very quiet. Caleb thought about Abigail riding south with her father's documents in her saddlebag, and Harold Briggs's letter pressed against her chest. He thought about the expedition, about the man who had paid him and then rewritten the story of what happened to protect his own reputation, about the check Caleb had cashed before he walked away, about what it felt like to be the kind of man who took money to stay quiet. He already knew what that felt like. He was not going to learn it again. No, he said. Fletcher blinked, as if the word had arrived in a language he didn't quite speak. I'm offering you steady work. I heard what you're offering, Caleb said. The answer is no. You're a drifter, Fletcher said, and there it was, the pleasant face dropped the thing underneath it showing. You have nothing. You're working on 30 days of borrowed time on a property that's going to be sold whether you stay or go. What exactly is the principle you're protecting here? Caleb stepped out of the barn doorway into the yard. He was taller than Fletcher by 3 inches and wider by more than that, and he moved with the particular stillness of a man who didn't need to rush because he had already decided how this ended. Get off her property, he said quietly. Fletcher held his ground for exactly 3 seconds. Caleb counted them. Then he mounted his horse. My father will have that land, he said, with or without your cooperation. Good luck to him, Caleb said. He watched Fletcher ride back down the mountain road until the dust settled. Then he went back into the barn and stood beside the cow with the injured fetlock and breathed until the anger in his chest became something quieter, something he could carry without it carrying him. He did not tell himself it didn't matter. He told himself it was information, and information was useful, and Abigail needed to know before she came back that the Briggs family had someone watching the road south. She returned on the evening of the 2nd day later than he had expected, and he could tell from the way she rode in, straight-backed, but something rigid about it. The rigidity of controlled urgency, rather than tiredness, that she had found something. She dismounted and handed him the reins without ceremony. The water rights are separate, she said. Filed in 69 before the deed. They're in my name. My father transferred them to me in 78. I have the document. Does Briggs know? He knows something, she said. The clerk at the territorial office told me there had been an inquiry on the file. 6 weeks ago. She looked at him. 6 weeks ago, my father was still alive. Caleb processed that. So he was planning before your father died, Caleb said. Before, she said. Or he was planning in anticipation of. She said it flatly, the way you said a thing that was terrible, and you had already decided not to be destroyed by it. I need to sit down, and I need coffee, and I need you to tell me whatever happened here while I was gone, because I can see from your face that something did. He told her about Fletcher. All of it, the offer, the request for information, the thinly veiled threat dressed up as an employment opportunity. He told it straight, no drama, the way it happened. He watched her face while he talked. She did not interrupt. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around the coffee cup he'd made before she arrived. He had seen her coming from the north pasture, given himself 10 minutes to have something ready, and she listened with the focused stillness of a woman cataloging every piece of information for later use. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He came here alone," she said. "Yes." "And you think that means it's not something his father sent him to do?" "I think it means his father doesn't know he did it," Caleb said. "Which means Fletcher is running his own piece of this separate from whatever Harold has in motion. Which means there are two plans, not one." She looked at him over the coffee cup. "You figured all that out standing in the yard." "I had 2 days to think about it," he said. For the first time since she'd ridden back and something in her face moved. Not a smile, not quite, but close. "The water rights change everything," she said. "If I hold the water and Briggs holds the land is worth about a third of what he's offering. He can't run cattle without water access. He can't develop the property without it. Whatever he's planning farming development selling it on it collapses without that water. He'll try to buy the rights separately," Caleb said. "He can try," she said. "They're not for sale." "He may try something other than buying." She met his eyes. The word hung between them, the thing they were both thinking, the shape of what men like Harold Briggs did when the legal path closed and the stakes were high enough. "I know," she said. "That's why I stopped at the land office in Ridgeline on the way back." He waited. "I filed a notice of a contest," she said, "against Briggs's preliminary foreclosure. It buys me time while the territorial court reviews the water rights documentation. Could be 60 days, could be more." She paused. "It also means I've just announced to the entire county that I'm fighting this." "And that I know about the water," Caleb said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Which means you should know this just got harder. And more public. And anyone who's associated with this property is going to feel the weight of that." She said it steadily, but there was a question underneath it. A question she wasn't quite asking directly. He understood it anyway. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She nodded once slowly. "Good," she said. "Because I need you to ride into town with me tomorrow. There's one more thing I need to do, and I'm not doing it alone." The thing she needed to do was speak to Thomas Galt. Thomas Galt was 71 years old, half-deaf in his left ear, and had operated the only general store in Ridgeline for 33 years. He was also, as Abigail explained on the ride down the informal memory of every land transaction, water dispute, and property boundary argument in the county, going back to 1851. He wrote nothing down, he kept it all in his head, which he claimed was safer since a head couldn't be subpoenaed. And he had been in some capacity she had never fully understood a friend of her father's. "Will he talk to you?" Caleb asked. "He'll talk to me," she said. "He talked to my father even when my father didn't want to hear it. Thomas Galt talks to anyone he thinks deserves the truth. And me." She glanced sideways at him. "You're with me," she said. "That should be enough." It was, and it wasn't. Galt looked at Caleb, the way old men looked at strangers in mountain towns, as if performing a rapid and comprehensive assessment of every risk the stranger might represent, comparing it against every story he'd ever heard about men like him, and delivering a verdict that he was not going to share aloud. "Montgomery," Galt said behind his counter. "You related to the Survey Montgomerys up in Summit County." Caleb went very still. Abigail felt it beside her the way you feel a change in a room's temperature. "Distantly," Caleb said. "Heard there was some trouble up there," Galt said, watching him. "Expedition that went sideways. A couple of men hurt." He paused. "Heard the guide walked." The silence lasted exactly long enough to matter. "I walked," Caleb said. "Yes, sir." Galt looked at him for another long moment. Then he turned to Abigail. "You trust this man?" She didn't hesitate. "I do." Galt nodded once. "All right," he said. "Sit down." What Thomas Galt told them over the next 40 minutes and 2 cups of coffee from the pot he kept behind the counter was this: Harold Briggs had been quietly acquiring land in the northern end of the county for 7 years. Not conspicuously, never enough in 1 year to attract the kind of attention that brought territorial oversight. A parcel here, a water easement there. a struggling ranch purchased at distress prices after a bad winter, a timber claim acquired when the family holding it ran out of sons to work it. He had done it slowly and carefully, and the resulting picture assembled piece by piece was only visible if you stood back far enough to see the whole county at once. The Carter property was the last piece, not because it was the most valuable piece individually, but because it sat geographically at the center point of everything else Briggs had acquired. Without it, the individual parcels were disconnected. With it, they formed a continuous block of land that ran from the main road north to the high grazing rangeland that could support a cattle operation of a scale that didn't exist yet in this part of Colorado, or could be sold as a single block to one of the cattle syndicates moving in from the east for a sum that would make every individual purchase Briggs had made look like pocket change. "How many people know this?" Abigail said. "I know it," Galt said. "And I've known it for about 3 years, which is about how long it took me to see the shape of it. Harold Briggs is not a foolish man. He didn't make it easy." "But he made a mistake," Caleb said. Galt looked at him. "He did." "The water rights," Caleb said. "He assumed they passed with the land. He didn't check. Or he checked and someone told him they did," Galt said. "The old filing is in a different register from the deed. A person not looking for it wouldn't know to look." "Except you," Abigail said. "Except me," Galt agreed. He looked at her with the careful directness of a man who had lived long enough to know when things were about to become irreversible. "You have the documentation." "I have it." "Then you have a case," he said. "A real one. If you can get it in front of the right judge before Briggs files his foreclosure action, you can get a ruling on those water rights that freezes everything. Briggs can't move without water access, and without water access, the land isn't worth what he owes on his other purchases. He'll be overextended." He paused. "He knows this, which means he knows that if you figure it out, he's in real trouble." "Which means he needs to move fast," Caleb said. "Before she can get the case filed," Galt confirmed. "How fast?" Abigail said. Galt looked at her. "I'd put it at 2 weeks," he said. "Maybe less." The three of them sat with that for a moment. 2 weeks. 30 days had felt impossibly short when Harold Briggs delivered it. 2 weeks was something else entirely. "I need a lawyer," Abigail said. "You need Edmund Frey in Denver," Galt said. "He's handled water rights cases before. He's not cheap." He paused again, and something shifted in his face. "He also owes me a favor, which I am willing to transfer to you if you'll allow it." Abigail looked at the old man across the counter. "Why?" she said quietly. "Because your father brought me firewood every winter for 20 years, Galt said, "and never once asked me for anything in return." He picked up his coffee cup. "I owe him more than I can pay. Paying you is the closest I can get." The ride back up the mountain was quieter than the ride down. Not an uncomfortable quiet, the kind that happens when two people have absorbed a significant amount of information and are separately turning it over, checking it, feeling for the weight of it. The mountain road rose around them. The summer light was beginning to angle. 2 weeks, Abigail said eventually. "We can get a message to Frey tonight," Caleb said. "Galt can send it through the stage line, Denver in 3 days, and if Briggs moves before Frey can file, then we deal with that when it happens." She was quiet again. Then, "You know what the worst part is?" He waited. "My father knew," she said. "He knew Briggs wanted the land. He knew there were people circling it. He believed it would sort itself somehow. That things would work out if you worked hard enough and kept your head down and didn't make enemies." She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than if she'd said it with bitterness. "He worked hard for 40 years and kept his head down and died owing money and left me alone on the mountain with a water filing and a crumbling roof and the full knowledge that none of it sorts itself." Caleb rode beside her and didn't try to correct her or comfort her or redirect her toward optimism. He had learned in the weeks since he'd arrived that Abigail Carter did not need redirecting. What she needed, what she almost never got from anyone, as far as he could tell, was for someone to hear the thing she was actually saying without immediately trying to make it something easier. "Your father was a good man," he said finally. Good men sometimes believe better of the world than it deserves. That's not a failure. It's just expensive. She turned to look at him. The directness of it, the full weight of her attention landed on him, the way her attention always did, without warning, and more significantly than he was prepared for. "Where did you go wrong?" she said. "Up north, really." He had told her about the expedition. He had told her about the storm, and the men, and the money. He had thought that was the truth. But the way she asked it, "Where did you go wrong?" as in what was the thing before the thing? The root of it, he found he was thinking about something else entirely. "I stopped trusting myself," he said. "Somewhere in the years before that expedition, I stopped trusting my own read on things and started listening to what people needed me to say instead. The man paying for the expedition needed the route to be viable, so I told myself it was viable." He paused. "I knew it wasn't. I knew it before we left. I told myself I was wrong about knowing it." She absorbed that. "That's not a mistake in a storm," she said. "That's a mistake that started years before the storm." "Yes, ma'am." "And you came through the high pass alone in June to prove to yourself that you still knew what you knew." "Something like that." She looked at the road ahead. "Did it work?" He thought about it honestly, the way he was still learning to think about things. Not the answer that was convenient, the one that was true. "Almost," he said. "Getting here, working here, watching you the way you read Briggs's letter, the way you talk to Galt, that helped more." She didn't say anything to that, but something in her posture changed. Some small thing. He noticed it and let it be. They reached the property as the light was going fully gold, the particular last-hour light of a mountain summer evening that made everything look like it had been burnished. Caleb took both horses to the paddock. Abigail went inside. He heard from the yard the sound of her opening the box where she kept her father's papers. He was coming back from the paddock when he heard the other sound. Horses on the road. More than two. Moving faster than the pace of people who had been in the saddle all day. He turned toward the sound. 4 men came up the road at a canter. He didn't recognize 3 of them. The 4th was a man he had seen twice in town. Marcus Webb, who worked for Briggs as a foreman, or had the title of foreman, and performed functions that were adjacent to that role, without being entirely contained by it. Webb pulled up at the gate. "Montgomery," he said. "Webb, we're here about the fence line," Webb said. "South property boundary. Mr. Briggs says the survey marker's been moved." Caleb looked at him steadily. "I've worked that fence line top to bottom," he said. "The markers are where they've always been." "Mr. Briggs disagrees." "Then Mr. Briggs should come say so himself." "Mr. Briggs sent us to have a look," Webb said. "We'd like to walk the line tonight." "Tonight," Caleb said. It was not quite dark. It would be not quite dark for another hour. Long enough to walk a fence line. Long enough to do other things. He thought about the water rights documentation in the box inside the house. He thought about where the fence line was at the far end of the south pasture, half a mile from where he was standing. He thought about 4 men and 1 woman, and what a distraction organized correctly could accomplish. "I'll walk it with you," he said. "Let me go inside and let Miss Carter know." "There's no need to bother her." "I'll let her know," Caleb said, and walked to the house. He went inside, closed the door, and crossed directly to where Abigail was sitting with the documents spread across the table. "Webb is outside with 3 men," he said low and even. "They want to walk the south fence line. Don't let them in the house. Lock the document box and put it under the floor if you can. They're not here about the fence." Abigail looked up from the papers. Her face did not change the controlled stillness of a woman who had already learned to absorb shocks without showing them. "How long do you need?" she said. 30 minutes, he said. "Walk them the whole line. Check every marker." He looked at her. "If they come to the house while I'm gone, don't open the door." "I know how to handle men who don't knock properly," she said. "I know you do." He held her gaze for just a moment. "I'll be back." He went back out to the yard. He took his time about it. He walked to the gate where Webb and the 3 other men were waiting, and he said, "She's having her supper. I told her I'd walk you down." Webb looked at the house, looked at Caleb. "All right," he said. Caleb led them toward the south fence line, through the evening light, talking about fence markers and property surveys, and the way mountain ground shifted with the freeze-thaw cycle, talking about anything and everything that would keep them looking at the ground and not at the house behind them, and all the time counting the minutes. He had not been afraid of much, he had told her. But walking 4 men away from Abigail Carter in the direction they wanted to go, trusting her to hold what mattered, felt like one of the longest 30 minutes of his life. When they came back, when he had walked them the whole line and cited chapter and verse on every marker, and given Webb nothing to argue with that would hold up in the daylight, the house was dark and quiet, and the lock on the front door was turned. He sent the men back down the road and stood in the yard in the dark. The lock clicked from the inside. Abigail opened the door. "They didn't come," she said. "No," he said. "They didn't." She looked at him for a moment in the dark of the doorway. "The documents are safe," she said. "Good." She started to close the door, then stopped. "Caleb." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. Not the thank you of a woman thanking an employee. Something more direct than that. Something she said looking at him in a way that meant exactly what it said, and nothing additional, and nothing less. "Good night, Miss Carter," he said. She closed the door. He stood in the yard for a while after in the mountain dark, with the stars coming clear above the peaks and the sound of the cattle settling in the north pasture. He thought about what Galt had said. 2 weeks. He thought about the man he had been 2 years ago, and the man he had been the day he rode down off the high pass onto this road, and the man he was tonight, the man who had just walked 4 of Harold Briggs's men away from a woman's home, and felt underneath the anger and the vigilance something clean and certain. I was not running from anything. He was standing in front of something. It was not a feeling he recognized easily, because he had not felt it in a long time. But he knew what it was. He had always been good at reading things right when he let himself. The message from Edmund Frey arrived 8 days after Galt sent it. 8 days was fast for Denver. Abigail knew this because she had sent letters to Denver before, to the Territorial Land Office, to her father's creditors, to a cousin who had moved there in 1879, and never written back. And 8 days was the kind of speed that meant the person on the other end had opened the letter the same day it arrived and sat down immediately to respond. Which meant Thomas Galt's favor carried more weight than he had let on. She read the letter standing at the kitchen table, still in her coat from checking the cattle. Frey could take the case. He had reviewed the description Galt had provided of the water rights filing and believed it was defensible, strongly. Defensible, his word underlined once, which from a lawyer was the equivalent of shouting. He would need the original documents. He would need to file in the Territorial Court in Denver within 10 days to get ahead of any foreclosure action Briggs might initiate. And he would need her to come to Denver in person because a judge reviewing a contested water rights case would want to see the woman making the claim, not just the paperwork. She put the letter on the table. "I have to go back to Denver," she said. Caleb looked up from the harness he was mending. He had come inside an hour ago to work on it at the table because the light in the barn was going, and she had noticed without saying anything about it that he had started doing this. Small migrations from the outbuildings into the house as evening came on. Not presumptuous, not announced, just present. "How long?" he said. 3 days minimum, possibly 5. She looked at the letter again. "He says he needs me in person, for the judge." When? He needs the documents within 10 days of his letter. She calculated. "That means I need to leave by the day after tomorrow." Caleb set the harness down. He was quiet in the particular way that meant he was thinking through something specific, not drifting. She had learned to read the difference. "Webb came by again this morning," he said. She looked at him sharply. "You didn't tell me." "I'm telling you now." He said it evenly, no apology in it, because it wasn't an apology situation. Not with men this time, just him on the road. He stopped at the gate and looked at the property for about 5 minutes and then rode back down. "Counting things," she said. "Or reporting back that you were still here." She sat down across from him. Between them on the table lay the letter from Frey, the harness Caleb had been working on, and the remains of the coffee she had made that morning gone cold. The ordinary furniture of a life that was under considerable pressure. "If I leave," she said, "and Briggs finds out I've left—" "He'll move," Caleb said. "Or try to. Can you hold this?" He looked at her steadily. What does holding it look like? It looks like not letting anyone onto this property who doesn't have legal authority to be here, she said. It looks like sending word to Galt if anything happens that needs a witness. It looks like... She stopped, started again. It looks like trusting you with everything I have for 5 days, with no guarantee that I'll come back in time to keep any of it. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. I can hold it. She nodded. She picked up Frey's letter and folded it along its original lines. There's a rifle in the bedroom, she said. Second drawer under the window has ammunition. Don't use either unless you have to. Understood. And the cow with the bad fetlock, check her every morning. The salve is working, but she needs... I know, he said. I've been checking her. She stopped, looked at him. I know you have, she said quietly. She left at dawn the next morning. This time Caleb didn't just saddle her horse. He rode with her as far as the road into Ridgeline, not because she asked him to, but because he had thought about Webb sitting on his horse at the gate counting things, and had decided that Abigail Carter was not going to ride down a mountain road alone while Harold Briggs had men watching the property. She didn't argue about it. That told him something. At the fork where the mountain road met the main track south, she pulled up her horse and turned to look at him. If Frey can file in time, she said, Briggs loses leverage. The water rights case goes to the territorial court, and the foreclosure gets complicated enough that he can't push it through cleanly. And if he can't file in time... She looked at him with those direct gray eyes. Then I'll think of something else, she said. I always do. He believed her. Abigail, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. He heard it as he said it, heard the difference, and so did she. Something shifted in her face. Not dramatically. Just a small reorientation, like a compass needle settling. Be careful, he said. Denver is not Ridgeline. Briggs has connections in the city. Don't tell anyone at the rooming house why you've come. Don't carry the documents openly. I know how to be careful. I know you do, he said. I'm saying it anyway. She looked at him for a moment longer than the moment required. Then she turned her horse and rode south, and Caleb watched her go until the road curved and she was out of sight, and then he turned back up the mountain. The first 2 days were quiet. Caleb worked. He finished the south fence. He repaired the hinge on the barn door that had been loose since before he arrived, the one she had never mentioned, but that he had watched her accommodate every single morning, lifting the door slightly as she opened it so it wouldn't drag. He checked the cow with the fetlock twice a day. He moved the herd. He did not allow himself to stop moving, because when he stopped moving, he thought about Abigail in Denver with the documents in her bag, and about Webb on the road, and about the shape of what Harold Briggs was capable of when he was running out of time. On the third morning, Thomas Galt's grandson rode up from town. He was 14, the grandson, and he had the look of a boy who had been given a message and told to deliver it fast and ask no questions, which was the look of someone who had been told enough to be frightened. Mr. Galt says to tell you, the boy said, catching his breath, that Mr. Harold Briggs filed a foreclosure action in the county court yesterday afternoon. Mr. Galt says he doesn't know how the 30 days shouldn't be up, but he says Mr. Briggs found a judge. Caleb looked at the boy. Which judge? Judge Alderman, out of the county seat. Alderman. Caleb turned the name over. He didn't know it, which meant nothing in a county where the judges were appointed rather than elected, and the appointments ran through men like Harold Briggs, who had the right relationships and the patience to build them over years. How long does she have? Caleb said. Mr. Galt says the filing gives her 7 days to respond, or the foreclosure proceeds automatically. The boy looked at him. But Mr. Galt also says he said to tell you this exactly. He said the water rights documentation, if it's in the territorial court, before the county court issues its order, then the county court can't act without the territorial court's ruling first. He said you'd understand what that means. Caleb understood exactly what it meant. It meant everything depended on whether Edmund Frey had already filed. Go back to Galt, Caleb said. Tell him I need to know if there's any way to reach Frey directly, any telegraph line to Denver. Mr. Galt has the telegraph key, the boy said. He said to tell you that too. Of course he did. Thomas Galt had been the unofficial center of information in this valley for 30 years. Of course he had the telegraph key. "Tell him I'm coming down," Caleb said. "Tell him to send a message to Frey's office in Denver. Ask whether the water rights documentation has been filed." The boy turned his horse. "Wait," Caleb said. The boy looked back. "Did Briggs do it publicly, the filing?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Galt says he did it at noon with witnesses. Says half the town knows by now." Caleb stood in the yard after the boy rode away. Half the town knew, which meant it would get back to Briggs within hours, that the Carter property had no one at it but a drifter with no legal standing, no documented relationship to the deed or the water rights or anything that mattered in a court of law, and that the woman who held all of that was 2 days' ride away. He went inside. He wrote a message to Abigail, brief, factual, no dramatics, sealed it, saddled the second horse, and rode to town. Galt had the telegraph office through the back of his store in a room that smelled of machine oil and old wood. He sent Caleb's message to Frey's Denver address while Caleb stood there, and then they both stood waiting with the particular tension of men, waiting on a thing they could not hurry. The reply came 22 minutes later. Galt read it. His face did not change, but something in his stillness shifted. "Frey filed yesterday morning," he said. "At 9 o'clock. Caleb exhaled. "The foreclosure action Briggs filed." Galt continued reading, "At noon after Frey's filing. The territorial court filing takes precedence. The county court cannot act while the territorial case is active." He looked up. Briggs didn't know Frey had already filed. He moved too late. The relief lasted about 4 seconds, because then Galt's expression changed again, shifted into something more careful. "There's a second message," he said slowly. "From Frey directly." He read it. He says Miss Carter appeared in court this morning. The judge heard preliminary arguments. Briggs's attorney appeared. Briggs himself appeared. He paused. He says Miss Carter is safe and the arguments went well. But he says Briggs made an offer in the courtroom in front of the judge. He offered to forgive the entire outstanding debt and pay Miss Carter an additional $500 if she would transfer the water rights and deed both. Caleb said nothing. "He says she refused," Galt said. "Of course she did," Caleb said. He says Briggs's attorney then argued that a woman alone with no husband and no male guardian should not be legally empowered to make that refusal without court oversight. Galt stopped reading. He set the paper on his counter very carefully, the way you set something down when you need your hands to be free. He says the judge took the argument under advisement. The room was quiet. "Under advisement," Caleb said. "Meaning what?" "Meaning the judge did not immediately dismiss it," Galt said. Caleb looked at the old man across the counter. He thought about Abigail in a Denver courtroom in her best dress, because she would have worn her best dress, and she would have sat completely straight in that chair, and she would have looked at the judge, and she would have been exactly the combination of composed and unyielding that she always was being told in formal legal language, that the question of whether she was allowed to make her own decisions about her own land was something a judge needed to think about. I thought about what that would have done to her face. Not the outside of it, the inside. The place she kept the things she didn't show. "When does the judge rule?" he said. "Frey says tomorrow morning." "I need to go to Denver," Caleb said. Galt looked at him. "I know I have no legal standing," Caleb said. "I know there's nothing I can do in that courtroom, but she's been in that city alone for 3 days, dealing with this, and tomorrow morning, a man is going to decide whether she's allowed to say no to someone who wants to take everything her father built, and He stopped. He did not have the words for what he was going to say next. Or he had them, and they were words he hadn't said to anyone in 2 years, and they wanted careful handling. "I'm not going to let her face that alone," he said. Galt was quiet for a moment. He looked at Caleb with those 71 years of accumulated assessment, and he said, "You'll ride through the night." "Yes." "It's 18 hours to Denver if the pass is clear." "I know." Galt reached under the counter and produced a piece of paper. He wrote something on it and folded it and handed it across. "Give that to Frey when you get there," he said. "It's a character letter for Miss Carter from me. I've been meaning to write it for 3 days and kept thinking I had time." He picked up his coffee cup. "It won't affect the judge's ruling, but it's something." Caleb took the letter. "Go," Galt said. "You're wasting dark." He rode through the night. The pass was clear, cold at the top, even in June. The kind of cold that lived at elevation, regardless of season, but clear. He pushed the horse as hard as he dared and rested it at the bottom of the east slope, and pushed again. He had ridden harder in worse conditions. He had led men through terrain that would have stopped a lesser guide. The difference was that on those expeditions he had been running toward something he was being paid to reach, and tonight he was riding toward something that couldn't be measured in those terms at all. I thought about what he would say to her when he got there. I thought about the first morning crouching in the dirt beside her fence line, watching her set posts with her bare hands in rocky mountain soil. He thought about her at the kitchen table with Harold Briggs's letter finding the thing in 3 paragraphs that he himself wouldn't have caught without her prompting. He thought about her face in the dark of the doorway after Webb's men had left "thank you" said plainly, without performance the way she said everything. He had told himself the first week that he was staying because the work was real and the place was quiet, and he was done with the kind of life that required him to manage other people's expectations of him. He had told himself the second week that he was staying because leaving would be the same kind of running he had sworn off. He had told himself the third week a variety of things, none of them precisely dishonest, but none of them the complete truth either. The complete truth was something he was arriving at slowly, the way you arrived at the top of a long climb, not in a rush, but with the particular clarity that came from putting one foot in front of the other for long enough that when you got there, you knew exactly where you were. He reached Denver in the gray hour before dawn. He found Frey's office from the address on the letter. A clerk arriving early let him in after reading the name Galt had given. Frey himself appeared 20 minutes later, a lean man in his 50s, precise in the way of someone who had spent decades choosing words carefully and had the face to show for it. He looked at Caleb. At the trail dust and the hours of hard riding and what was probably visible in Caleb's face, even though Caleb was doing his best to make sure it wasn't. "You're Montgomery," Frey said. "Yes, sir." "Galt telegraphed me that you might be coming." Frey poured him coffee without asking. "She doesn't know you're here." "I know. She'll have something to say about it." "Probably," Caleb said. "How bad is it?" Frey sat across from him. "The water rights case is solid," he said. "I'm not worried about the water rights. The judge we drew is honest, and honest judges read solid cases correctly." He paused. "The problem is the argument Briggs's attorney raised yesterday. About legal guardianship. About whether a woman of her age and marital status has unconstrained authority over a property of this complexity." "That's not a legal argument," Caleb said. "That's an insult." "It is both," Frey said. "And in 1884 in the Colorado Territory, the line between them is thinner than either of us would like." He picked up his own coffee. "The judge is honest, but honest judges operate within the law as it exists, and the law as it exists has opinions about women making large financial decisions independently." "What does she need?" Caleb said. Frey looked at him. "In an ideal world, a husband." He said it without editorial as pure legal information. A male co-claimant on the water rights filing would eliminate Briggs's argument entirely. There would be nothing to take under advisement. Caleb was very still. "That's not a solution," he said. "No," Frey agreed. "It is not." He paused. "What she actually has is a strong case, a good judge, and the territorial filing precedent on her side. What she may have, depending on how the judge rules this morning on the guardianship question, is a delay, a referral to a higher court, more time and more money, which Briggs is counting on because he believes she'll run out of the second before she runs out of the first." "How much time before court?" 2 hours. "I need to see her before then." Frey studied him for a long moment. "She's at the Whitmore rooming house," he said, 3 blocks east. He picked up his pen. "Montgomery, whatever your relationship is to that woman, and I am drawing my own inference," he said. "The difference," Frey said, "is visible from a judge's bench at 30 feet." She answered the door of the rooming house on his second knock. She was dressed fully, precisely, her best dress and her hair done, and her face composed in the expression she wore when she was about to walk into something she intended to win. She had clearly been awake for some time. She looked at him in his doorway, with an expression that went through several phases in quick succession. Shock, and then something sharp and unguarded, and then the composure back again, but not quite as complete as before. "You rode through the night," she said. "Yes. That was not necessary." "No," he said. "It wasn't." She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back from the door and let him in. The room was small and neat in the way of someone who kept things orderly when everything else was not. Her father's documents were arranged on the small desk by the window. She had organized them. He could see into some kind of sequence that Frey had probably directed. "The judge took the guardianship argument under advisement," she said. She said it like a report, like a thing she was delivering to him the same way she delivered everything factually, without the performance of the feeling underneath it. I know, he said. "Frey told me." "It's insulting," she said. "I know. It's an argument that I cannot make my own decisions about my own property because I don't have a man attached to me. And it is an insult to every year I have spent working that land alone, and if the judge rules in Briggs's favor on it, I will." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "I will deal with it," she said. "I will find another way. I always find another way." "Abigail." She looked at him. "I know you will," he said. "That's not why I rode here." The room was very quiet. The Denver street outside made its early morning sounds. Cart's voice, the particular noise of a city waking up that was so different from the particular noise of a mountain waking up. "Then why?" she said. He had thought about this for 18 hours on horseback. He had run through versions of it in his head, the measured version and the direct version and the version that was honest without being more than the situation required. He had thought about what Frey had said, the difference between fighting for something to save and fighting for something to hold. The difference visible from 30 feet. "Because you've been sitting in this room since yesterday," he said, "carrying something you shouldn't have to carry alone. And I didn't want you to walk into that courtroom this morning having carried it alone all night." She stood very still. "I'm not going to tell you it'll be fine," he said. "I don't know that it'll be fine. What I know is that your case is solid, and your lawyer is good, and you are the most capable woman I have ever met. And if anyone can walk into a room where a man is questioning her right to her own decisions, and come out the other side with what she came for, it is you." He paused. "I just wanted you to know, someone knows that. Someone who was there for the fence posts, and the bad pump, and Webb's men at the gate, and all of it." He looked at her directly. "You're not invisible, Abigail. What you've done is not invisible." She held his gaze for a long time. Something moved through her face that she did not stop, did not compose back into stillness, did not reroute into practicality. She let it be there. "You rode 18 hours, she said quietly. "Thereabouts." "Because you didn't want me to be alone." "Yes." She turned away from him, moved to the window, stood there for a moment with her back to him, and he waited because he had learned that Abigail Carter needed exactly the space she needed, and not a single moment more. Then she turned back. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said. "About yesterday. About the courtroom." Her voice was even. Too even. "When Briggs made the offer, the $500 and the forgiven debt. His attorney looked at me, and he said that a reasonable woman would understand that the practical reality of her situation outweighed any sentimental attachment to a piece of land." She paused. "And Harold Briggs looked at me, and he smiled." Caleb said nothing. "Not at the judge," she said. "At me. He smiled at me the way my father used to describe the wolves smiling, the ones that came in the winter when the cattle were weak. Like it was already done. Like I just hadn't been told yet." "What did you do?" Caleb said. "I looked at the judge," she said. "And I said, Your Honor, with respect, my attachment to this property is not sentimental. It is legal documented, and predates any claim Mr. Briggs believes he holds by 15 years. The suggestion that I am incapable of understanding my own interests is incorrect, and I would ask the court to treat it accordingly." She stopped. "The judge wrote something down. I don't know what." You said exactly the right thing, Caleb said. I know I did. She looked at him. I was terrified. The word landed in the room differently than he expected. Not because she said it to him, because she let it be said. I know, he said. I don't show it. I know that too, he said. You've had a lot of practice not showing it. She looked at him. And in her face, in that careful, composed face, he saw the thing that lived under all of it, the long years of holding everything together, the 30-second rule, the 11 days of a stranger in her yard before she let herself trust anything. The water rights documentation carried against her chest, like armor, the way she had said thank you in the dark of a doorway and meant it entirely and shown him only a fraction of how much. Caleb, she said. Yes. When this is over. She stopped. When this is over, he said quietly, we'll talk. She nodded once. Get some coffee, she said, and picked up the documents from the desk and began to organize herself for the walk to the courthouse. And Caleb Montgomery, who had not been someone's reason to stay anywhere in 2 years, sat down in the chair by the door of the small neat room and drank the cold coffee that was there and watched a woman who needed no saving prepare to go save herself, and felt for the first time in longer than he could precisely remember, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The judge ruled at 9:47 in the morning. He ruled in her favor on the guardianship question briefly, without ceremony, in 3 sentences, that essentially said that the territorial property law of 1869 did not require a woman to have male oversight to exercise documented legal rights, and that he declined to send the question to a higher court. Briggs's attorney objected. The judge overruled it. On the water rights case itself, the judge scheduled a full hearing for 4 weeks out. He issued a temporary injunction blocking any county court action on the Carter property until the territorial case was resolved. In practical terms, Briggs couldn't move. Not for 4 weeks at minimum. Not without the water rights resolved. And the water rights Frey told them quietly in the hallway afterward were as solid as he had said they were. Abigail stood in the courthouse hallway and held the injunction order in her hands. Caleb stood beside. Across the hallway, Harold Briggs looked at them both. He looked at Caleb the way a man looked at something he had not accounted for. Not with anger, not yet, but with the careful recalculation of someone adjusting a plan to include a variable he hadn't known was there. Fletcher Briggs, standing beside his father, looked at Caleb with something sharper than recalculation. Caleb looked back. Steady. Still. Harold Briggs turned and walked away. Frey appeared beside them, tucking papers into his case. 4 weeks, he said. Use them. We will, Abigail said. Frey looked between them. Made a small sound that was not quite a comment. Tipped his hat to Abigail. Nodded to Caleb. Went the way Harold Briggs had gone in the direction of the exit, leaving them standing in the hallway with the injunction order and the particular charged silence of a thing not yet finished but no longer falling. 4 weeks, Abigail said. Yes, Caleb said. She looked at the document in her hands. Then she looked at him. You need to sleep, she said. You've been on a horse all night. I've been in worse condition. That's not a denial. She folded the injunction carefully. There's a room at the Whitmore. I'll ask Mrs. Whitmore if it's still available. I can find somewhere. Caleb. She said it the way she said things when she was done discussing them. You rode 18 hours. You can sleep 1 night in Denver before we ride back. He looked at her. The courthouse hall was emptying around them, the morning session, breaking up people moving in both directions, with the purposeful noise of legal proceedings continuing to proceed. All right, he said. She started toward the door. He fell into step beside her. Harold Briggs looked at you, she said. I know. He was recalculating something. I know that too. She was quiet for a step. He's going to find out who you are, she said. He has the money to do it, and whoever you were in the north, whatever your name meant up there, he's going to find it. Caleb had known this was coming. Had known it since the morning Fletcher rode up to the property and offered him money for information. Had known that a man like Briggs, denied on the legal front, would look for every other angle that existed. And the angle of Caleb Montgomery's history in the Saywatch Range was not a small angle. I know, he said. When he does, she said, I need you to tell me first, whatever it is, whatever he finds. She looked at him as they walked. Not because I'll think differently of you, but because I need to know what's coming before it arrives. He thought about the expedition, about the men who had been hurt, about the man who had rewritten the story and the check Caleb had cashed, and the years he had spent afterward at elevation in the cold, going over and over a thing he could not undo. When we get back, he said, I'll tell you all of it. She nodded. They stepped out of the courthouse into the full morning light. He had come to her property with nothing. No plan beyond the next week, no intention beyond the next task, no sense of himself as someone building toward anything. He had come to her property like a man who had given up on having something to come home to. He hadn't expected the property to become home. He hadn't expected the woman to become the reason. But the truth, as he had told himself on the mountain pass, and as he was finding again now in a Denver street in the summer of 1884, was this: he had always been good at reading things right when he let himself. And everything about Abigail Carter read true. They rode back to the mountain in 2 days. Not because 2 days was the fastest it could be done. Caleb had proved that 18 hours was possible when necessary, but because Abigail would not push a horse past its reasonable limit without genuine emergency, and the injunction order in her saddlebag meant that for the moment, emergency had been suspended. 4 weeks, Frey had said. 4 weeks before the territorial court hearing. 4 weeks in which Harold Briggs could not legally touch the property, the water rights, or anything attached to either. 4 weeks was not a long time, but it was enough to breathe. She did not talk much on the ride back. Neither did he. They had developed over the weeks since his arrival a shared vocabulary of silence, the kind that didn't require filling, that meant something different from avoidance or discomfort. It meant they were both thinking and both trusted the other to be thinking, and neither needed to perform conversation to prove they were present. He noticed on the second day that she had stopped riding slightly ahead of him. It was a small thing. The kind of thing you would not notice unless you had been paying close attention to the patterns of another person for long enough to see when the pattern shifted. Since the first day, she had directed them, choosing the pace, choosing the route, holding the front position on the road with the deliberateness of a woman who did not want anyone, not even someone she was beginning to trust, to mistake who was leading. Today, she was riding beside him. He did not comment on it. He filed it where he filed most things about her carefully, in a place he returned to when he was alone, and the work of the day had quieted enough to let him think. They reached the Carter property on the evening of the second day. Everything was as he had left it. He had known it would be. He had left the place in the best condition he could manage in the time available, and he had learned the property well enough by now to know what it would and wouldn't do in 5 days without supervision. The cattle were where he had put them. The water trough in the north pasture was still running. The barn door swung properly on its repaired hinge. Abigail walked through the house first, the way she always did when she returned from anywhere, a circuit room to room checking. He had thought at first it was anxiety. He understood now it was inventory. The habit of a woman who had been responsible for everything for a long time and knew that the only way to stay on top of everything was to see it all regularly and know its condition. She came back to the kitchen. "Everything's fine," she said. "Yes." She sat down at the table. She put the saddlebag with the documents in it on the chair beside her, and she looked at the table, and she breathed once, the way a person breathed when they had been holding tension in their chest for several days, and were only now allowing themselves to release it. "We need to talk," she said. "I know," he said. "I said I'd tell you everything when we got back. Not just about you." She looked up at him. "About what comes next, the 4 weeks, how we use them. One thing at a time," he said. "Sit with it tonight. Tomorrow we plan." She looked at him. A fraction of something crossed her face, not quite surprise, but adjacent to it. The look of a woman who gave instructions and directives and plans to everyone around her, because she had learned that no one else was going to, and who had not in a very long time been told by someone else that she was allowed to sit down for one evening. "All right," she said. "One night. High mod supper." She did not offer to help, and he did not invite it, and that arrangement, which had been slightly awkward in the first week, felt now simply like the right distribution of what needed doing. She sat at the table with the injunction order laid flat in front of her, and she read it 3 more times, the way she read everything, completely looking for what wasn't immediately visible. He put food on the table and sat across from her, and they ate in the quiet that was their particular kind of quiet, and outside the mountain settled into its summer evening, and neither of them mentioned Denver or the courthouse or Harold Briggs, until the dishes were done and the coffee was made and there was no more useful activity to use as a boundary. Then Abigail put her cup down and said, "Tell me." He told her all of it. Not the version he had told her in pieces: the expedition, the storm, the men who were hurt, the money he had taken. He told her the version underneath that one, the longer version. The one that started 10 years before the expedition, when Caleb Montgomery was 28 years old and had more skill and more confidence than almost any guide working the Rockies, and had built a reputation that men with money came from the East specifically to access. He told her about the years of that, the work which he loved, and the version of himself the work required him to be, which he had not examined carefully enough. The version of himself that was always certain, always sure, always the man who knew the mountain and read the weather and made the call that no one else could make. The man who had never been wrong, or more precisely the man who had been wrong sometimes and had been good enough at the rest of it, that the wrong times got absorbed into the larger narrative of his competence and disappeared. He told her about Preston Vale, the man who had paid for the expedition. Wealthy from Chicago with interests in mining claims, and a need to survey a high route that other guides had refused. Vale had come to Caleb specifically because Caleb's reputation said he did the routes others turned down. And Vale had a way of talking that made you feel while he was talking that turning down was not something men like Caleb Montgomery did. "He didn't threaten you," Abigail said. "No," Caleb said. "Nothing so direct. He just assumed. Assumed I would take the route. Assumed I would find a way. Assumed that any uncertainty I expressed was the kind of professional caution that would be overcome by confidence in my own abilities." He looked at the table. "And I let him assume. Because he was right that I could usually find a way. Because I had always found a way. Because I had started to believe my own reputation more than my own judgment. And the storm. I saw it coming 2 days before it hit," he said. "I saw the pressure system moving in from the northwest. I knew what it meant. I had seen that system before coming out of Utah, and I knew it moved faster than it looked and hit harder than you expected from the initial signs." He paused. "I talked myself out of it. I told myself I was reading too much into it. I told myself Vale's schedule mattered. I told myself I had come through worse." "You hadn't." "No," he said. "I hadn't come through that particular kind of worse. I had come through different kinds of worse, which are not the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. James Calloway lost 3 fingers. He was the best topographer in the territory, and he never worked at elevation again. Rook, the youngest man on the crew, had a rock fall on his leg and spent 6 months healing, and he healed wrong, and he still walks with a hitch that wasn't there before. Abigail said nothing. She held his gaze and let him say it without interruption, which was one of the things about her he had come to depend on. In a way he hadn't anticipated, she did not rush in to make things easier. She trusted him to finish. "When we got back," he said, "Vale called it the weather. In the report he filed with his backers, in the letters he wrote, in the version that got told around every survey office and guide station in the range. The weather had turned unexpectedly. The guide had performed admirably under impossible conditions. No negligence, no bad call, an act of nature." He looked at his hands. "And I let it stand. I took the money Vale paid me. I didn't correct the record." "Why?" Abigail said. He had asked himself this question for 2 years. "Because Calloway didn't blame me," he said. "Because Rook didn't blame me. Because the version Vale told was kinder than the truth, and everyone who heard it was willing to believe it. And in that moment, that specific moment, sitting in Vale's office in Denver with a check in my hand, I told myself that correcting it would only hurt more people. That Calloway and Rook had moved on. That the truth would cost them something they hadn't asked for." He stopped. And because I was a coward, he said. At the end of the accounting, that's what it was. I was afraid of what I was without the reputation, and I let a lie stand to protect it. The fire in the kitchen stove ticked. Outside wind moved over the mountain. You came through the high pass, Abigail said slowly. In June, with no one to see you do it. Yes. Because if you could read that mountain right, she said, with nothing at stake, no one paying you, no reputation to protect, you'd know whether you still trusted yourself. Yes, he said, and you made it. I made it. She picked up her coffee cup. She was quiet for what felt like a long time, but was probably 30 seconds. She had a way of making silence feel complete, unhurried, like something she was using rather than simply occupying. The reputation wasn't the problem, she said finally. The problem was what you believed about yourself when you had it. She met his eyes. You believed you were the man who never got it wrong. So when you got it wrong, you had nothing to stand on. No version of Caleb Montgomery that had made mistakes and kept going anyway. He stared at her. You've thought about this, he said. I've thought about my father, she said, who believed that if he worked hard enough and kept his head down and stayed out of trouble, the mountain would take care of him. And when it didn't, when the debt came in and the roof started failing and Briggs started circling, he didn't have a version of himself that could fight back. He'd never needed to be that man before. She looked at the injunction order on the table. I made myself be that woman early, because I watched him and I knew what it cost not to be. Caleb sat across from her in the kitchen of her father's house and understood something that he had been approaching for weeks without being able to name it. She had not hired him because she needed to be saved. She had hired him because she needed someone who could carry a load alongside her without needing her to manage how heavy it was. Harold Briggs is going to find out about the expedition, he said. He's already looking. He had men watching the South Road before we left for Denver. He has money and connections, and enough anger to use both. I know. When he does, he's going to use it. In the water rights hearing, if he can argue that you've entrusted your property to a man with a history of negligence and poor judgment. A guide who left 2 men injured and took money to stay quiet about it. He can try, she said. Abigail, it could affect the case. It could, she said. Or it could be the story of a man who made a mistake, told me the truth about it, and has spent the last 6 weeks demonstrating exactly who he is. She looked at him steadily. I'll take my chances on which version holds up. He could not find a response to that, so he did what he had learned to do with the things Abigail said that landed too accurately to answer. He held it and was quiet and let it be real. The 4 weeks moved fast. The first week, Abigail wrote to every neighboring property owner within writing distance, not asking for anything, informing. She had discovered in her research with Galt that Briggs's land acquisition strategy had affected 4 other properties in the valley, not through foreclosure, but through the purchase of water easements that had quietly shifted the balance of who could run cattle, where and when. She laid it out in letters. Factual, direct. Attached a copy of the relevant portions of the territorial water law. 3 families wrote back within days. A 4th wrote up in person, a man named Arlo Vess, whose family had been on their property longer than the Carters, who read the letter twice, and then looked at Abigail across his kitchen table and said, I wondered why my east pasture spring slowed 2 summers ago. He paused. What do you need? Testimony, she said. At the territorial court hearing, anyone who can speak to how the water distribution in this valley has changed in the last 7 years. Vess looked at her. Looked at Caleb, who was standing by the door with his hat in his hands. You're the man Briggs tried to hire, Vess said. He tried to hire information, Caleb said. Not me. Vess considered that. All right, he said. I'll be at the hearing. The second week brought the thing they had been waiting for. Caleb was in the barn when he heard a rider coming fast up the road. Not the measured pace of someone with business, but the urgent canter of someone with news. He came out to find a boy he didn't know pulling up at the gate out of breath with a folded paper in his hand. For Miss Carter, the boy said, from Galt. Abigail was at the fence line, and Caleb went for her. She read the note standing in the north pasture with the cattle moving around her, and her face did something he had only seen it do once before in the Denver rooming house, when he had told her she wasn't invisible. "What?" he said. She handed him the note. It was from Galt. But the information in it was from a contact Galt had in Denver, a clerk in the Territorial Records Office, who had over the course of 30 years developed opinions about the men who used that office to make themselves rich at other people's expense, and who had developed a habit of noticing things. The note said this Preston Vale, Caleb's former employer, had been in Denver 2 weeks ago. He had met with Harold Briggs. The meeting had taken place in Briggs's attorney's office and had lasted 2 hours. "He found Vale," Caleb said. "He went looking," Abigail said. "He knew about you, about the expedition. He went and found the man who could do the most damage with the story." Caleb stood in the north pasture and felt the very specific cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Vale. He had not thought about Vale in 6 months. Had not allowed himself to think about Vale because thinking about Vale meant thinking about the check and the silence and the specific shape of the cowardice that Abigail had named correctly the night before last. Vale, who had rewritten the story of that expedition to protect his own money and his own reputation, who had cast Caleb as the hero of an impossible situation rather than the man who had made a bad call. Vale, who now apparently had a new story to tell, one that served Harold Briggs instead. He's going to testify," Caleb said. "At the hearing. Briggs is going to put him on the stand, and Vale is going to tell a version of the expedition that makes me look like a danger and a liability, and a man whose presence on this property should raise questions about your judgment." "Probably," Abigail said. "Abigail, don't," she said, not harshly, firmly. "Don't tell me it changes anything. Don't tell me you should leave. Don't tell me this is your fault or that I should put distance between us before the hearing." She looked at him with the full force of that gray-eyed directness. "I have watched you for 6 weeks. I know what I know." "Your case. My case is about water rights and land law," she said. "Not about you. Briggs wants it to be about you because he can't win on the law." She took the note back from him. Let him try. He looked at her. He thought about Preston Vale and the check and the silence and the thing he had been carrying for 2 years. He thought about what it meant that a man like Vale, a man who rewrote stories to protect himself, was now in Harold Briggs's corner. He thought about Calloway's 3 fingers and Rook's halting walk, and the way neither of them had blamed him, which had been in the end the hardest thing of all. "I want to write to Calloway," he said. "And Rook." Abigail looked at him. "Why?" "Because they deserve to know that the story Vale told isn't the one I'm telling anymore," he said. "Because I took money to stay quiet, and I spent 2 years telling myself it was for their benefit, and I'm done with that particular lie." He paused. "And because if Vale is going to stand up in a courtroom and tell a version of what happened, I want Calloway and Rook to hear the true version from me first." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "Write the letters," she said. "I'll have Galt send them through the fast post." The 3rd week was when Fletcher Briggs made his move. Not Harold. Fletcher. Caleb was at the south fence when he saw Fletcher's horse coming up the road, and this time Fletcher had someone with him. A woman. Caleb didn't recognize her until they got closer. And then he did Margaret Hollis, who ran the dry goods with her husband, who was also Dorothy Marsh's closest friend, and who was the fastest conduit between private information and public knowledge in the entire county. He walked to the gate. "Fletcher," he said. "Montgomery." Fletcher was doing the pleasant face again, the one that didn't reach anything above the chin. "We're not here for trouble. Mrs. Hollis wanted to come out and speak to Abigail directly." "About what?" "About the situation," Fletcher said. "As a friend. We're all concerned about her out here alone." "She's not alone," Caleb said. Fletcher looked at him. "That's actually part of what we're concerned about," he said, and Mrs. Hollis had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, which told Caleb she knew exactly why she had been brought and was not entirely at peace with it. Caleb did not move from the gate. "Miss Carter is working," he said. "If Mrs. Hollis would like to leave a card, I'll tell her she called." "We'd like to see her in person," Fletcher said, and his voice sharpened. "If you don't mind." "I do mind," Caleb said. Because the last time you came to this property without being invited, you offered me money to spy on her. And the time before that, you sent 4 men to walk her fence line while she was in Denver, with the apparent intention of accessing her house. He looked at Fletcher steadily. So you'll forgive me if I'm not inclined to open the gate. The pleasant face was entirely gone now. You don't have any legal authority. She gave me authority over this property while she manages the case, Caleb said. I have it in writing. You're welcome to test that in the county court if you'd like to add to your father's legal expenses. He didn't have it in writing. He was fairly certain Fletcher knew this. He was equally certain that Fletcher was not going to call the bluff while Mrs. Hollis was sitting there on her horse watching it happen, because that scene played out in Margaret Hollis's telling would not serve the Briggs family's purposes. Fletcher pulled his horse back. This isn't over, he said. It never was, Caleb said. Good afternoon. He watched them go back down the mountain road. Then he went to find Abigail. She was in the kitchen when he came in, and she listened to all of it without interrupting. And when he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Margaret Hollis. Yes. He brought her to talk to me about the impropriety of having a man on the property. That was my reading. And you turned them away. Yes. Was that wrong? She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. No, she said. But Margaret Hollis is going to tell everyone in town what happened at that gate, which means everyone in town is going to have an opinion about you and me and this property by Sunday. They already have opinions, he said. Different opinions, she said. More specific ones. She looked at him. Are you prepared for that? He met her eyes. He thought about what he was prepared for. The full accounting, the honest one, without the version that protected the reputation or softened the edge of it. Yes, he said. Something moved in her face. A decision or the confirmation of one she had already been making gradually for weeks. All right, she said. Then I need to tell you something. He waited. I wrote to Frey this morning, she said, before Fletcher came. I asked him about something I've been considering since Denver. She did not look away from him. I asked him whether adding a co-claimant to the water rights documentation before the hearing would affect the case, legally. The kitchen was very quiet. What did he say? Caleb said carefully. He said it would eliminate Briggs's argument entirely, she said. It would remove the question of guardianship from the hearing. It would mean the case rested purely on the water law, where we're strongest. She paused. He said the co-claimant would need to have a documented relationship to the property and would need to appear at the hearing. Caleb stood very still. Abigail, he said. I know what I'm saying, she said. And I know what I'm not saying. I'm not asking you for anything you haven't already. She stopped. Started again with a precision. He recognized the precision of a woman who weighed words the same way she weighed everything else for their actual content, not their emotional convenience. I'm telling you what Frey told me. What I do with it is my decision. But you are in this, and what I decide affects you, and I'm not making decisions that affect you without telling you. He crossed the kitchen. He pulled out the chair across from her, and he sat down, and he looked at her directly, the way she always looked at him, without performance, without the version of the thing that was easier than the true version. What do you want? He said. I want my land, she said. I want my water rights. I want Harold Briggs to lose. She held his gaze. And I want... She stopped. Her jaw tightened fractionally. I want the thing that's been building since the first morning you fixed my fence post to be a real thing, not a legal convenience, not a strategy. She looked at him. But I'm not willing to use it as a strategy even if it would work. So I'm telling you, and I'm asking you what you want, and whatever you say, the case is the case, and I will fight it on its merits. Caleb sat across from Abigail Carter in the kitchen, where she had fed him supper on his first night, where they had read Briggs's letter together, and found the water in it, where she had told him about the wolf smile and the judge, and the terror. She didn't show, and he thought about the high pass, and the limestone in the post hole, and the 18-hour ride, and 4 men at a fence line, and the 30 seconds she gave herself to feel things before she went back to work. I want the same thing, he said. All of it, in the same order. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "We're not doing it before the hearing, whatever it is. We do this right or we don't do it." "Agreed," he said. After, she said. "When it's settled." "After," he said. She stood up, picked up her coffee cup, put it in the wash basin, turned back to him with the expression that meant the personal portion of the conversation was complete and the practical portion was resuming. "We have the Vess family, the Harmon family, and the Delacroix claim coming for testimony," she said. "I need to write to them all before the week is out about what to expect in the territorial court." "I'll ride to Vess tomorrow," he said. "Easier in person." "Good." She paused. "Caleb." He looked up. "The letters to Calloway and Rook," she said. "Did you send them?" "Galt sent them yesterday." She nodded, slowly. Something in her face that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same territory. "Good," she said again, and went back to her papers. 4 days before the hearing, a letter arrived from James Calloway. Caleb read it in the bunkhouse alone, which was the only way he could have read it. It required privacy, and it required the full accounting that privacy allowed. Calloway's handwriting was different from what he remembered. The letter smaller and rounder on the left side where the hand that held the pen was not the one that had been frostbitten, because it had not been that hand, but the other one that had compensated for the damage for 2 years and was still compensating. The letter was 3 pages long. It said this: Calloway had known. He had known on the mountain 2 days before the storm hit that Caleb had read it right and then talked himself out of it. He had seen it in the way Caleb had looked at the northwest sky that second morning and said nothing. He had been angry for a year quietly, in the way of a man who had decided the anger was unproductive and was managing it rather than expressing it. He had not blamed Caleb publicly because public blame would have cost him more than it cost Caleb, in a world where the men who hired guides also hired topographers, and a reputation for causing trouble was its own kind of damage. So he had stayed quiet. And he had told himself the quiet was practical and not cowardly, which was a lie he recognized now because Caleb's letter had named the same lie in a different context, and the recognition was uncomfortably specific. The letter said, "I don't forgive you for the mountain. I'm working on it." That's the honest answer, and I think you'd rather have the honest one. The letter said, "I forgive you for the money and the silence, because I know what it is to take the path that protects what you have left." The letter said Rook is well. He works for a surveying firm in Salt Lake, and his leg is better than it was. He asked me to tell you when I told him you'd written that he hopes you found what you were looking for. The letter said at the end, in a postscript written in slightly different ink, as if added after the letter was set aside and returned to, "If it would help for whatever you're doing now, you can tell them what I've told you. That I knew. That I'm working on the forgiving." A man who writes a letter like yours is not the same man who stood in the storm and stayed quiet. I can't say more than that yet, but it's something. Caleb sat in the bunkhouse with the letter in his hands and the mountain evening outside the single window, and let it be what it was. Not absolution, not the clean ending, but the true one. The one that required him to hold both the wrong he had done and the man he was working to be, without collapsing either into the other. After a while he went inside. Abigail was at the table. She looked at his face when he came through the door, and she read it the way she read everything completely without looking away. She did not ask. She got up and poured coffee and put it in front of him and sat back down, and he was grateful more than he could have said at that moment for the specific intelligence of that response. The understanding that some things needed to be held for a while before they could be talked about. The willingness to sit with him in the holding. They sat across from each other in the kitchen, and the fire ticked in the stove, and outside the mountain was doing what the mountain always did, enormous and indifferent, and in that indifference oddly steadying. Calloway wrote, Caleb said eventually. "I know," she said. "I could tell." It's not clean," he said. It doesn't have to be clean," she said. "It has to be real." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "It's real." She nodded once, picked up her coffee. 4 days, she said. 4 days, he said. Outside the mountain turned in its vast slow way toward whatever came next. Inside the kitchen of the Carter property, a woman who had never stopped fighting and a man who had finally decided to stop running, sat across a table from each other in the quiet that was their particular kind of quiet, and drank their coffee and waited for the morning to come. They rode to Denver the morning of the hearing with 3 other families. It had not been planned that way. Arlo Vess had appeared at the Carter gate before dawn with his wife and his oldest son. All of them dressed in their good clothes, Vess in a coat Caleb suspected had last been worn at a funeral. The Harmon family arrived from the East Road 20 minutes later. Daniel Harmon and his brother, who had driven through the night. And then, unexpectedly, a wagon carrying 2 women Caleb didn't recognize pulled up alongside them on the main road south, and Abigail said quietly, "That's Clara Delacroix and her daughter-in-law," and said nothing more, but the way she said it, the slight catch in the breath before the composure locked back into place, told him that Clara Delacroix's presence was not something she had counted on, and was something that mattered considerably. They made quite a procession on the road to Denver. Caleb rode beside Abigail at the front. He was aware of the picture they presented, aware of it in the way you were aware of things that had shifted from private to public, from the interior of a kitchen at the end of the day to the open road in the early morning with witnesses. He did not adjust anything about the way he rode or where he rode. Neither did she. Vess pulled up beside him at one point, his horse falling into stride, and said without preamble, "Briggs tried to buy my Eastwater easement in '81, offered me a fair price. I sold it because I needed the money, and I thought—" He stopped. "I thought it didn't change anything essential." He looked at the road ahead. "I was wrong about that." "You're here now," Caleb said. "I'm here now." Vess agreed and dropped back. The territorial courthouse in Denver was a different room from the one where Abigail had stood 4 weeks ago, and it was the same room entirely. Same quality of light through tall windows. Same smell of old wood and paper, and the particular institutional seriousness of a place where decisions got made and written down and carried forward into other people's lives. Same judge, the honest one, Frey had said. And Frey had been right, you could see it in the way the man sat. Not the comfortable authority of someone who was never questioned. The careful attention of someone who understood that getting it right mattered. Harold Briggs was already there when they arrived. He sat at the opposite table with his attorney, a man named Coulter, who had the lean precision of someone who won cases by finding the specific weakness in an argument and pressing on it until it gave, and 3 other men Caleb didn't know but recognized by type. The type that sat with powerful men to make them look more powerful by association. Preston Vale was not in the room. Caleb noticed this immediately. He had prepared himself for Vale, had prepared himself for the specific experience of seeing that face again, the affable, managing face of a man who rewrote things for his own convenience, and for whatever came after that in terms of his own internal accounting. He had thought about it on the ride down. He had decided he was ready for it. Vale was not there. He leaned toward Frey, who was arranging papers with the focused quiet of a man entering his best territory. "Vale," he said low. Frey glanced up. "Subpoena came back unserved," he said equally low. "He's apparently traveling, out of the territory." Caleb sat with that for a moment. "Briggs doesn't know," Frey said. "Or he knows and he's adjusting. Either way we proceed." Abigail was watching the room. He could see her cataloging the judge's posture. Coulter's papers, the 3 association men, the small group of observers in the back who had come in after them. She was doing the same thing she always did, seeing it completely, assessing, deciding. She turned to him. "Vale isn't here," she said. "No." "Why?" "I don't know yet," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "It changes things," she said. "It might. Coulter is going to have to argue without his star witness," she said, "which means he's going to come at the case differently. Frey needs to know." "Frey knows," Caleb said. She looked at the attorney. Frey was already watching Coulter with the specific attention of a man recalibrating. She saw it and gave a single nod. The judge called the room to order. The first hour of the hearing was the water law, and it was Frey's hour entirely. He was methodical. He laid out the original 1869, filing the 1878 transfer, the territorial precedent cases, the language of the water rights documentation. He was not dramatic about it. He did not perform. He simply placed the facts in order one after another, with the calm certainty of a man who knew that the facts properly arranged required no embellishment. Coulter objected 3 times. The judge sustained 1 and overruled 2, which Frey had predicted in almost exactly those proportions when they had spoken that morning. Then Coulter stood. He did not go after the water law. Frey had been right that the law was solid, and Coulter was too experienced to attack solid ground directly. He went instead after the character of the claim. The management of the property. The question of whether the water rights and the land had been properly maintained and administered in the time since Robert Carter's death. He called Briggs's first witness, a man named Phelps, who identified himself as a property assessor, and proceeded to deliver a carefully structured account of the Carter Ranch's condition, the deferred maintenance, the debt, the state of the outbuildings and fencing as of his assessment in late March, 2 weeks after Robert Carter died. Frey cross-examined efficiently. He established the date of the assessment 2 weeks after Robert Carter died before Abigail had any assistance on the property. He established that Phelps had not returned since. He established that the property's condition as of the assessment date represented the state of a recently bereaved woman managing a mountain ranch alone in early spring, not the state of the property at the time of the hearing. Phelps stepped down. Coulter called his second witness. The name he called was not one Caleb had expected. Dorothy Marsh, Coulter said. Abigail's jaw tightened. Just once. Just fractionally. Dorothy Marsh settled into the witness chair with the practiced composure of a woman who had been preparing for this moment and took it seriously. She was not malicious. Caleb had the sense watching her that she genuinely believed what she was about to say, which in some ways made it worse. She testified that Abigail Carter was a good woman who had been placed in an impossible situation. She testified that the arrival of an unknown man on the property had concerned the community. She testified that, in her opinion, which Coulter framed carefully as the opinion of a longtime community member with genuine concern for Miss Carter's welfare, the management of the property. Since Robert Carter's death had been erratic, that decisions had been made without the kind of counsel that a woman in that situation required, and that the water rights case itself was an example of a legal action that a more experienced hand might have counseled against. Frey stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Marsh, he said, you testified that the management of the Carter property has been erratic. Can you describe specifically what you observed that led you to that conclusion? Dorothy Marsh looked at him. Well, the fence work, and the decisions Miss Carter made about her hired hand. The fence work, Frey said. The fence that was repaired. It had been in disrepair for some time, and it was repaired by Miss Carter and her ranch hand, who you've described as a concern. Is it your testimony that a repaired fence is evidence of erratic management? Dorothy Marsh opened her mouth and closed it. The decisions Miss Carter made about her hired hand, Frey continued. Are you referring to the decision to hire someone to help her manage a property alone after the death of her father? Is that the decision you believe a more experienced hand might have counseled against? The man's background. Have you met Mr. Montgomery, Mrs. Marsh? I have not personally. Have you spoken with anyone who has, other than Mr. Fletcher Briggs, who approached you about this testimony? The room went very still. Dorothy Marsh's face changed. The composure cracked not dramatically, but enough. He didn't approach me about. He mentioned he was concerned and asked if I would be willing to speak to what I'd observed. Fletcher Briggs asked you to come today, Frey said. He mentioned the hearing. Thank you, Mrs. Marsh, Frey said. No further questions. Dorothy Marsh stepped down. She did not look at Abigail as she passed. Abigail did not look at her either, which took Caleb knew a specific kind of discipline. Harold Briggs leaned toward Coulter. Caleb watched Coulter shake his head slightly, a small controlled gesture of reassessment. Then Coulter called his next witness. Mr. Caleb Montgomery, he said. Caleb had known this was possible. Frey had warned him it was possible. A hostile witness called by opposing counsel not to testify on their behalf, but to be questioned to have the story of the expedition put into the record of a hearing about water rights where it didn't belong, and where Coulter would be hoping it would cast enough shadow to make the judge hesitant. He stood. He felt Abigail's eyes on him as he walked to the witness chair. He did not look at her. He looked at the judge, then at Coulter, and he settled into the chair with the stillness he had learned over years of mountains. The stillness that was not passivity, but attention, the body in repose and the mind entirely present. Coulter established his name, his occupation, his presence on the Carter property. Then, Mr. Montgomery, were you employed as a wilderness guide in the Colorado Territory in the years preceding your arrival at the Carter Ranch? Yes. Were you involved in an expedition in the Saywatch Range in the summer of 1882? Yes. Were 2 men injured in the course of that expedition? Yes. Were those injuries the result of your decision to continue the expedition despite signs of dangerous weather? Caleb looked at Coulter. He thought about the 2 versions of this answer, the defensive one, the one that used the weather and the pressure and the context to soften the core of it. He thought about Calloway's letter. About the man who had written a letter like yours is not the same man who stood in the storm. Yes, he said. Coulter paused. He had clearly expected a more qualified answer. The unqualified one shifted the ground slightly, and Caleb watched Coulter recalibrate. And following that expedition, Coulter continued carefully. You accepted payment from the expedition's financier and did not correct the official account of events which attributed the injuries to weather conditions rather than to your judgment. Yes, Caleb said. So you concealed your responsibility. I allowed someone else's concealment to stand, Caleb said, which is the same thing. Coulter moved toward his point. And yet you present yourself as a trustworthy manager of Miss Carter's property and interests. I don't present myself as anything, Caleb said. I work the property. Miss Carter makes her own assessments. Miss Carter, who was alone and in difficult circumstances when you arrived. Miss Carter, who interviewed me at the gate, set the terms of my employment, identified the water rights issue in a legal document. I had not seen Road to Denver alone to file a case, and appeared in this courtroom 4 weeks ago and told your client's attorney that she was capable of understanding her own interests. Caleb looked at Coulter steadily. The concern about her judgment seems misplaced. Coulter's jaw tightened. Mr. Montgomery, I made a mistake, Caleb said before Coulter could redirect. In the Saywatch Range in 1882, I made a bad call that hurt 2 men, and I took money and let a lie stand for 2 years. And I've told Abigail Carter every part of that story, because she asked me for the truth and she deserved it. He looked at the judge, not at Coulter, because the judge was who mattered. What I haven't done is misrepresent the Carter property's water rights manufacture, a foreclosure action, send men to walk a woman's fence line while she was away from home, attempt to bribe her employee for information, or subpoena a character witness at the request of the opposing party's son. He paused. I reckon the question of trustworthy management depends on what you're comparing it to. The room was absolutely silent. The judge wrote something down. Coulter said, "No further questions," in a tone that indicated he was done with this particular line entirely. Frey stood. Mr. Montgomery, the 2 men injured in the 1882 expedition, have you been in contact with them regarding the events of that expedition? Yes, within the last 2 weeks. Did you in that contact accurately represent your role in what occurred? I told them the truth, Caleb said. That I read the weather right and then convinced myself I was wrong. That I accepted money and let a lie stand. That I was sorry. And their response. Caleb thought about Calloway's letter. About the round, careful handwriting. About the sentence he had read 15 times in the bunkhouse by lamplight. I don't forgive you for the mountain. I'm working on it. One of them said he is working on forgiving me, Caleb said. He said a man who writes a letter like mine is not the same man who stood in the storm. He paused. I'm trying to be worth that. Frey said nothing further and sat down. The twist came just before the lunch recess, and it came from a direction no one in that room had anticipated. The judge had asked Coulter whether he had additional witnesses. Coulter had said no. The absence of Vail had cost him the linchpin of his character argument, and Dorothy Marsh's testimony had been dismantled efficiently enough that calling anyone else on that line seemed inadvisable. I was pivoting back to the legal arguments, and Frey was ready for that, and the hearing was moving in the direction Frey had predicted. Then a clerk came through the side door of the courtroom and handed the judge a document. The judge read it. His expression did not change dramatically, but Caleb had been reading people in difficult terrain for 20 years, and he could see the shift, the slight recalibration, the moment of decision. "Counsel will approach," the judge said. Frey and Coulter went forward. Caleb watched Frey read the document, watched Frey's face do something that was not quite surprise and not quite satisfaction, but was in the vicinity of both. Coulter read it. His face did something different entirely. They returned to their tables. The judge addressed the room. "The court has received a sworn affidavit," he said, "filed this morning through the Territorial Records Office from one James Calloway, surveyor, formerly of Summit County." He paused. "Mr. Calloway's affidavit pertains to the events of the 1882 Sawatch expedition, and specifically addresses statements made in the official expedition report filed by Preston Vale at that time." Another pause. "The affidavit states that the expedition report's attribution of the injuries sustained to weather conditions was inaccurate, and that the accurate account, which involves a judgment call by the expedition guide, was known to Mr. Calloway at the time, and is consistent with the account given this morning by Mr. Montgomery." The room absorbed this. Furthermore, the judge said, "Mr. Calloway's affidavit states that the misrepresentation in the official report was initiated by Mr. Vale, not by Mr. Montgomery, and that Mr. Calloway has no legal claim or grievance against Mr. Montgomery in connection with the expedition." He set the document down. "The affidavit is entered into the record. Its relevance to the water rights case before this court is limited, but given that opposing counsel introduced the expedition testimony to raise questions of character, the court considers Mr. Calloway's statement directly responsive." Caleb sat very still. Calloway had sent the affidavit, had filed it through the territorial office, had not even told Caleb it was coming, had simply done it, had decided in whatever private reckoning had followed Caleb's letter that this was the thing he could do. Not forgiveness yet. Something more practical. Something that cost him something to give. He felt Abigail's hand on his arm. Not a dramatic gesture, brief, firm 2 seconds. The kind of touch that communicated something precise and then was done. He looked at her. "He did that on his own," she said very quietly. "Yes," Caleb said. "He didn't have to." "No," Caleb said. "He didn't." She looked at him for a moment with those direct eyes, and then she looked back at the judge, and Caleb looked at the table, and the hearing resumed around them, and he sat with the specific quality of that unexpected grace. The thing you hadn't earned and hadn't expected, and had no framework for, except to hold it carefully and let it change you in the ways it was going to change you. The judge ruled at 3:45 in the afternoon. The water rights were Abigail Carter's, documented legal predating any claim Briggs held or could hold on the land. The county foreclosure action was stayed pending the territorial ruling, and with the territorial ruling now issued, the foreclosure could not proceed. The Carter property landwater, the creek, the seasonal spring, the grazing range that ran up toward the high pass was hers. Harold Briggs stood when the ruling was read. He stood the way a large man stood when something large had failed, not collapsing, but settling the weight, redistribution of a man, absorbing a significant blow, and deciding how to carry it. He looked at Coulter. Coulter said something quiet. Briggs said something back. Then Harold Briggs turned and walked out of the courtroom, and he did not look at Abigail as he passed, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Fletcher, who had been sitting in the back among the observers, did look at her. He looked at her with an expression that Caleb catalogued and filed not the end of something, the interruption of it. Men like Fletcher Briggs did not finish a thing until they decided they were finished. Caleb noted it, and let Abigail see that he had noted it, and she gave him the slight nod that meant she had too. Frey was shaking hands, talking to the court clerk, organizing his papers with the efficient satisfaction of a man who had done a job well and was already thinking about the next one. Vess appeared beside Caleb. "Well," he said. "Well," Caleb agreed. "My East Spring," Vess said. "The water easement Briggs bought in '81, Frey thinks I have grounds to contest it now. Talk to Frey, Caleb said. But yes. Vess nodded. He started to move away, and then stopped. You did right up there on the stand, he said. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Clara Delacroix found Abigail near the courthouse door, and took her hands in both of hers, the gesture of an older woman who had seen enough of the world to know when something mattered, and to say so physically. Caleb watched Abigail receive it, saw the composure hold, and then soften just at the edges, in the way it only softened when something got through the guard. Your father would be proud, Clara said. Abigail pressed the old woman's hands. Thank you for coming, she said. I didn't expect... I know you didn't, Clara said. That's why I came. They rode back in the long summer light, the procession looser now, the Harmon brothers ahead, and the Vess family, dropping back to talk with the Delacroix wagon. Caleb and Abigail rode side by side in the middle of it, which was both where they had been all day and not where they had been at all. Calloway, Abigail said, after they had been riding for a while. Yes. You didn't know he was going to do that. No. He did it because of your letter, she said. He did it because he decided to, Caleb said. My letter gave him the opening. What he did with it was his. She was quiet for a moment. That's a generous way to read it. It's the accurate way, he said. He didn't owe me anything. He chose to give something anyway. Those are different things. She looked at him. The late afternoon light came at an angle through the mountain air that made everything very clear and very specific. The edge of things, the particular quality of color in the hour before the sun dropped behind the peaks. Caleb, she said. Yes. It's settled, she said. He looked at her. He knew what she meant. He had known for 4 weeks what she meant had been carrying the weight of the after. The thing they had agreed would wait until the case was decided. The thing that had been building since the first fence post and the limestone in the post hole, and the 30 seconds she gave herself in the morning before she went back to work. It's settled, he confirmed. She rode for a moment without speaking. Then she said, I'm not going to pretend I know what this is. I know what I want it to be. I know what it's been building toward. She looked at the road ahead. But I'm not a woman who takes things for granted. I've learned not to be. I know, he said. So I'm asking directly, she said. Because I don't have patience for the version where we circle around it for another month. She turned to look at him with the full directness she turned on everything. Are you staying? He had been asked this question in one form or another by one person or another for most of his adult life. He had answered it with varying degrees of honesty, which were really varying degrees of awareness, because the honest answer required knowing something about yourself that he had spent a long time not knowing. He knew it now. I'm staying, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her face, not the restrained flicker of the woman who kept everything managed and measured, but the real thing, the thing she let out in 30-second intervals, and only when she was sure of the ground beneath her. Good, she said. And then because she was Abigail Carter, and she did not produce more words than the moment required, she looked back at the road, and they rode on. The summer finished itself the way mountain summers always did, fast and with extravagance. The high pasture came in better than it had in 3 years, Vess told her, which he attributed partly to the season and partly to the way Caleb had managed the grazing rotation. The cattle put on weight. The south fence held. The cow with the bad fetlock recovered fully, which Caleb noted with the quiet satisfaction of a man who took small victories seriously. Frey wrote in late August to say that Vess's water easement case was moving forward and that 2 of the other property owners in the valley had consulted him on similar claims. The letter also noted in its final paragraph that the Briggs land holdings were under review by a territorial auditor, following questions raised by the water rights ruling about the consistency of Briggs's acquisition strategy with territorial land law. Frey did not predict an outcome. He noted the review was proceeding. Harold Briggs did not come back up the mountain road. Fletcher came once in July and stopped at the gate and looked at the property for a long time. Caleb was at the fence line and saw him from a distance. He walked to the gate. Fletcher looked at him, looked at the repaired fence, the rebuilt storage roof, the paddock with 12 cattle, now instead of 8. The bunkhouse with its new door, the house with its windows clean and its porch rail level. "It looks different," Fletcher said. "It is different," Caleb said. Fletcher sat on his horse for a moment. "My father is going to try again," he said. "Not now, but eventually." "I know," Caleb said. "We'll be here." Fletcher looked at him at the word "we," a long assessing look. Then he turned his horse and rode back down the mountain, and Caleb watched him go, and thought that the next time would be different, not only because they were more prepared, but because the shape of the thing had changed. Harold Briggs had been counting on a woman alone without resources, without allies, without someone in her corner who knew the terrain. He was not going to find that arrangement the next time he came looking. On a morning in late August, Abigail came out to the paddock where Caleb was working with the young horse she had purchased in July, a green-broke mare with good bone and bad manners, which he was addressing with the patient consistency that he applied to most problems. She leaned on the fence rail and watched him for a while. The mare was responding. She always responded when you were consistent enough for long enough. "Golt wants to know," she said, "if you're planning to file a co-claimant addition to the water rights documentation." He kept his attention on the horse. "Is that what Galt wants to know, or is that what you want to know?" A pause. Both, she said. He brought the mare to a halt and turned to look at her. She was standing at the fence with her arms resting on the top rail, and her face in the morning light entirely open, entirely without the guard she carried into rooms full of people who were deciding things about her. The face she had in the kitchen at the end of the day, and on horseback in the clear mountain air, and in the 30 seconds she gave herself before she went back to work. "I think," he said, "that the co-claimant addition makes legal sense." "It does," she said. "And I think," he said, setting the mare loose in the paddock and walking toward the fence, "that we should probably have a conversation with the circuit preacher when he comes through in September." She looked at him. "I reckon that's a reasonable timeline," she said. He stopped at the fence rail close enough that the morning light caught both of them in the same angle, the same quality of Colorado summer, the same mountain air that had been here before both of them and would be here long after. "Abigail," he said. "Yes, I rode through the high pass in June because I needed to know if I still trusted myself," he said. "I found out I did, but I also found out—" He stopped. He said the rest of it the way he said things when they were true, and required saying plainly, "I found out what it feels like to be in the right place. I hadn't felt that in a long time. I don't intend to leave it." She held his gaze for a long moment. The mare moved in the paddock behind him. Somewhere up the mountain wind moved through the high timber. "You fixed my fence," she said. "The very first day." "The limestone in the post hole," he said. "You knew how," she said. "Not because someone told you. Because you'd learned it, and you kept it, and you used it." She looked at him. "That's who you are, Caleb. You kept the real things even when you lost the rest." He had no answer for that. So he did what he had learned to do with the things Abigail said that landed too accurately to answer. He held it and let it be real. She pushed off the fence rail and straightened. "The circuit preacher comes through the second week of September," she said in the tone of a woman closing a practical matter that has been satisfactorily resolved. "I'll be here," he said. "I know you will," she said, and walked back to the house. In September, when the aspen on the high slopes were beginning to turn and the morning air carried the first edge of what was coming, the circuit preacher rode through Ridgeline and was persuaded to continue up the mountain road to the Carter property, where Thomas Galt and Arlo Vess and his wife and Clara Delacroix and her daughter-in-law stood in the yard and watched Abigail Carter and Caleb Montgomery say the words that made a thing that had been building since a June morning and a broken fence post into something with a name. Dorothy Marsh was not there. Margaret Hollis was not there. Harold Briggs was not there, and Fletcher Briggs was not there, and Preston Vale was certainly not there. Arlo Vess's wife cried, which she had not expected to do. Thomas Galt did not cry, but his expression for the duration of the brief ceremony was the expression of a man who had watched this valley for 30 years and was watching it correctly again. Afterward, Galt found Caleb at the paddock fence. "Your letters to Calloway," he said. "He wrote me. Did you know?" "No," Caleb said. He said, Galt paused the pause of a man selecting the accurate quotation. He said that a man who tells the truth when it costs him something is worth knowing. He said he's working on the rest. Galt looked out at the mountain. He also said to tell you that Rook's leg is better. Almost no hitch at all now. Caleb stood at the fence with that. Good, he said. It was not enough of a word. It was the only one that was entirely true. Galt patted the fence post, the one Caleb had reset and packed with limestone on his second day on the property, before he knew what any of this was going to be, and then walked back toward the house where the others were. The mountain was doing what it always did, enormous indifferent steadying. The high pass was visible from the paddock on a clear day, the route he had come down in June, with 2 years of wrong decisions behind him, and nothing in front of him but the next task. He had read the mountain right that day. He had read what was right the next day, and the day after, and the day the storm hit Denver, and they rode to Frey's office in the morning dark, and the day in the courtroom when the honest answer was the only one worth giving. He had been good at reading things right all his life when he let himself. And now, Abigail Carter. Abigail Montgomery, the name so new. It still felt like something to be handled carefully came through the door of the house and crossed the yard and stood beside him at the fence, and she looked at the mountain the same way he was looking at it, and she did not say anything, because there was nothing that needed saying that was not already evident. A woman who had never stopped fighting, and a man who had finally learned to stop running, had found in a summer of broken fences and water rights, and a courtroom in Denver. The thing that was harder to build than either of them had expected, and more durable than either of them had dared to count on. The mountain did not care about any of it. The mountain was simply there, as it had always been, the high pass, and the timber, and the season turning, and the long view, and the cold that was coming, that was always coming, that they would face together when it arrived. Some people spent their whole lives looking for a safe place to land. Abigail and Caleb Montgomery had found something better, a place worth standing in, and someone worth standing beside, and the certain knowledge that when the next hard thing came, and it would come, because that was the nature of mountains and the nature of life, they would not be standing alone. That was not a small thing. That was everything.